been lied to about loss. They told you time heals all wounds, that if you just keep busy, the pain will fade, that one day you'll simply move on. But if that were true, why does the emptiness still ache years later? Why does a memory, a photograph, a familiar scent bring back the tears you thought were gone? Why do you still feel heavy inside, carrying grief like a stone in your chest that no one else can see? The truth is, loss isn't something you erase. It isn't something you run from. It's something you learn to live with, something you can transform. And Buddhist wisdom holds the map. For thousands of years, monks and masters faced the same heartbreak, death, separation, endings, and discovered a way not just to survive it, but to find peace within it. Not by pretending the pain doesn't exist, but by understanding impermanence, compassion, and the deeper meaning hidden in every goodbye. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will shift. The storm of thoughts will begin to quiet. The weight you've carried will soften. You'll feel a gentle space open in your heart, a place where grief and peace can exist together. And when you wake tomorrow, the world will look different. The pain may still be there, but it won't control you. You'll breathe easier, feel lighter, and know you are not broken. This isn't just another bedtime story. This is a healing, a chance to make peace with loss. Are you ready? Let's begin. Loss can feel like the cruelest thief. It arrives without warning, stripping away what you thought would always be there. A familiar voice, a touch, the warmth of a presence, suddenly gone. And in that space, the mind clings, replaying moments, begging time to reverse. But Buddhism whispers a different truth. Nothing was ever meant to stay. Every breath, every heartbeat, every sunrise has always been moving, shifting, dissolving. This is not punishment. This is the nature of life. And when you see impermanence not only as loss, but as liberation, everything changes. Impermanence, or anicca, is one of the central teachings of the Buddha. It tells us that everything, from the smallest grain of sand to the greatest love story, is in a constant state of change. This truth can sting, especially when it takes from us what we most cherish. But if you lean closer, if you look beyond the sting, impermanence reveals itself as a hidden gift. It shows you that clinging is where suffering hides. When you grip tightly to people, moments, or even emotions, you fight against the flow of life itself. And like holding onto a rope that's being pulled, the tighter you grip, the deeper the burn. The liberation comes when you stop fighting the current. Think of the seasons. Leaves fall, snow covers the ground, flowers bloom, and then the cycle begins again. None of this is tragic. It is life unfolding exactly as it must. The same is true of your own life and the lives around you. To resist impermanence is to demand that spring never end, that flowers never wilt. But would a flower's beauty mean as much if it bloomed forever? Its preciousness is born from its fragility, and so is yours. When you allow impermanence to teach you, even grief takes on a different color. Instead of asking, "Why did this have to end?" you begin to see that it was never supposed to be permanent. The laughter, the connection, the love, they were gifts on loan, meant to be experienced fully in their time. Their ending does not erase their value. In fact, their ending is what made them valuable. A jewel that cannot be lost eventually becomes invisible. But when you know it will slip from your hand, you treasure it with all the presence you can muster. Impermanence also frees you from the weight of resentment. Every painful memory, every harsh word someone once spoke to you, they too are impermanent. They pass like clouds drifting across a vast sky. Clinging to anger or bitterness is like refusing to let go of smoke. The Buddha often reminded his students that suffering arises when we demand permanence from a world that cannot give it. Liberation is not in forcing life to stay the same, but in aligning with its rhythm, in loosening the grip, in letting things come and go. There is also a deep tenderness in impermanence. When you truly understand that nothing will last, you become more attentive. You listen more closely to the voice on the phone. You hold the hug a little longer. You pay attention to the small details, the way someone laughs, the softness in their eyes, the warmth in their hand, because you know one day these will only live in memory. Impermanence does not numb you. It wakes you up. It invites you to be present, because each moment is fleeting, unrepeatable, and therefore infinitely precious. This truth does not only apply to relationships, but to every corner of existence. Your fears, too, are impermanent. That anxiety that weighs so heavily tonight will not stay forever. Your grief, sharp as it feels now, will shift in shape and texture. Even the body you inhabit is a moving tide of cells, changing from moment to moment. You have never been the same person twice. Liberation is remembering that what feels unbearable now will not feel this way forever. No storm, no matter how violent, has ever refused to pass. Some people hear this teaching and think it sounds cold, as if Buddhism asks us not to love or not to care. But it is the opposite. When you stop demanding permanence, your love becomes purer. You love without trying to possess. You love without holding someone hostage to your expectations. You love knowing that the moment you share together is complete in itself, needing no guarantee of tomorrow. This kind of love does not fear loss because it never claimed ownership in the first place. It is like sunlight warming your skin. You do not try to capture it in a jar. You simply bask in it while it lasts. Impermanence also cuts through the illusion of control. How much energy is wasted trying to freeze life in place? We save photographs, hoard possessions, replay old stories in our heads as if these could shield us from the river of time. Yet even the photograph fades, the possessions break, the stories grow dim. To live as though impermanence is negotiable is to fight against truth itself. To accept it, however, is to be released from endless struggle. You cannot control the flow, but you can learn to float within it. This teaching also carries an invitation to release your own identity. You cling not only to people or things, but to an idea of yourself, your youth, your roles, your achievements, your failures. But who you were yesterday is gone. The version of you reading these words will vanish into memory before the day ends. Does that frighten you, or does it liberate you? It means you are never trapped. You are free to change, to grow, to let go of what no longer serves you. If your sadness feels permanent, remember that you too are impermanent. The you who suffers now will not be the you forever. Impermanence is not just a concept, it is a practice. Monks train themselves to watch their breath, noticing how each inhale rises and falls, never the same as the last. They look at a candle's flame, aware it is born anew in every flicker. They observe rivers, trees, stars. Everywhere they look, the lesson repeats. Change is the only constant. When you begin to see this not with the mind, but with the heart, you start to relax into the truth. You stop clutching at permanence like a child clutching a melting ice cream cone. You open your hand and let life move. The liberation lies here. When you stop demanding that things stay, you start to enjoy them while they are here. You stop fearing their end because you understand that endings are not mistakes. They are part of the design. And you stop clinging to pain because you know it too will fade. What remains is a softness, a trust in the rhythm of existence, a quiet courage to face each day, not with desperation, but with presence. Grief often blinds us to this wisdom. It convinces us that the world has ended with our loss. But impermanence teaches otherwise. The world has not ended, it has simply changed shape. Your loved one's smile may no longer be here in the same form, but its echo lives in your memory, in the lessons they left behind, in the way their existence ripples through the lives they touched. Impermanence does not erase them. It reminds you that their presence was always a gift, not a possession. And when you see life this way, even your own mortality becomes less terrifying. You too are impermanent, but this is not tragedy. It means you are part of the great cycle, no different than the leaves that fall or the waves that crash and recede. Liberation comes when you no longer fight this truth, but live aligned with it, tasting each moment, knowing it will pass, and finding peace in that passing. The next time grief rises, notice it, feel its sharpness, and then remember, this too is impermanent. It will change, it will soften, it will shift. The love you lost was never yours to own, but it was yours to experience. And that experience, fleeting though it was, is a treasure no loss can erase. This is the gift hidden in impermanence. Not just loss, but liberation. When we begin to see impermanence not as an enemy, but as a teacher, something else quietly rises to the surface. If nothing lasts, then what does it really mean to say that we own anything at all? We cling to people as if they belong to us. We guard our possessions as if they are extensions of who we are. We even speak of my body as though it were something permanent that we could control forever. But when loss comes, this illusion shatters, and what hurts the most is not only the absence, but the belief that what slipped away was truly ours to keep. The Buddha pointed to this illusion as another root of suffering, the idea of ownership. To understand that ownership itself is empty is to soften the sting of separation and to see that what we thought we held was always passing through our hands. Ownership feels natural. We grow up learning the word mine, my toy, my house, my career, my partner. Language itself reinforces the idea that life can be carved into pieces of possession. But if you look closely, you'll see that nothing was ever truly yours. Start with the body you call mine. Every cell within it is borrowed. The food you eat becomes your flesh. The air you breathe fuels each heartbeat, and the water you drink flows through your veins. Without these constant gifts from the world around you, this body would collapse. Even your thoughts and emotions arise and pass away on their own, without asking for your permission. They come like guests, stay for a time, and leave. To say, my body or my mind, is a convenience of speech, but it hides a deeper truth. You never truly own them. When you realize this, the fear of losing the body softens. It was never yours to begin with. It is more like a rented house that you live in for a time. You care for it, you inhabit it, you make it a home, but one day the lease ends. The pain of illness, the changes of age, the certainty of death, all of this becomes easier to hold when you see that you were only ever a guest here. You appreciate the body for what it allows you to experience, but you no longer cling to it as your possession. And when the time comes to give it back, you do so with less fear, less resistance. This truth extends to relationships. We often treat love as ownership. We speak of my partner, my child, my friend, as though these people exist to complete us, to fulfill us, to belong to us. But every person is a universe of their own, moving on a path that you cannot fully control. To think otherwise is to build your joy on fragile ground. When loss comes, a breakup, distance, death, the shock is doubled because not only do we miss the person, but our sense of ownership is threatened. We cry out, "How could this happen to me?" as if the universe broke a contract it never signed. Yet when you release the idea of ownership, you begin to love more freely. You see that people are not possessions, they are gifts. They come into your life, they share moments, and then they move on. Their presence is no less valuable because it was temporary. In fact, it is more precious because it was never guaranteed. Possessions, too, teach the same lesson. Think of every object you call yours, your clothes, your phone, your home. Each one is temporary. They break, they decay, they pass into the hands of others. Even if you cling tightly, time will pry them away. At best, you are a caretaker, not an owner. The great Buddhist teachers remind us that possessions can bring comfort, but never security. They are tools, not extensions of self. When you confuse the two, loss feels like losing a part of yourself. But when you see that ownership is empty, you can enjoy what you have while it is here, and let it go when it leaves. You stop building your identity on sand. Even the people we admire most in history understood this. Kings who ruled vast lands, billionaires with unimaginable wealth, all left empty-handed when death came. No crown, no palace, no fortune could follow them. The Buddha himself was a prince surrounded by luxury, yet he walked away because he saw that none of it could shield him from sickness, old age, and death. He realized that true freedom does not come from adding more to own, but from letting go of the illusion of ownership altogether. Grief becomes softer when this truth is absorbed. The pain of separation still comes, but the sharp edge of "this was mine and now it is gone" begins to dull. You start to see that everything and everyone has always been passing through. Loss does not mean robbery, it means the end of a visit. Just as a traveler at a station cannot hold on to the passing trains, you cannot hold on to the flow of life. But you can appreciate each arrival, each moment of connection, without demanding permanence. This is how emptiness of ownership becomes healing. The mind resists this truth because ownership gives a sense of stability. If I can say mine, then perhaps I can feel safe. Yet, the very attempt creates more insecurity. You worry about losing what you own. You fear changes that threaten it. You measure your worth by the size of your possessions. It is a cycle of craving and fear that never ends. By loosening the grip on ownership, you release yourself from this cycle. You start to see that security does not come from holding, but from releasing. True safety lies in aligning with reality, not in fighting it. Ownership also fuels comparison. When you believe in mine, you look at yours. You measure yourself against others, your wealth, your success, your relationships, always seeking validation. This comparison is endless because there will always be someone with more or less. But when ownership dissolves, comparison weakens. You see that life is not a competition of who owns the most, but a flow of experiences that each person receives in different ways. Your joy no longer depends on keeping up or surpassing anyone else. It rests in presence, in gratitude, in the ability to experience without clinging. There is a deeper layer here. Even your suffering is not truly yours. When pain arises, the instinct is to say, "I suffer, this is my grief." But grief is not owned. It is a universal human experience flowing through you in this moment. Countless others have felt it. Countless others will feel it. To see your sorrow as mine isolates you. To see it as part of the human stream connects you. You realize you are not alone, not singled out. You are participating in something vast, something shared, and this recognition brings compassion. The emptiness of ownership does not mean indifference. It does not mean you stop caring or loving. It means you stop confusing caring with clinging. Stop confusing love with possession. You can love deeply without chaining the other to your expectations. You can care without demanding permanence. This shift transforms relationships. It turns love into freedom rather than captivity. It allows you to walk alongside others without trying to hold them still. When you practice this, even small daily frustrations ease. The lost wallet, the broken phone, the unexpected goodbyes, they sting less because you know they were never truly yours. You carried them for a time, and now they have moved on. And in this letting go, you find peace. Buddhism often points to the word empty. Empty does not mean meaningless. Empty means free of fixed ownership, free of permanence. A cup is empty so that it can be filled. Life is empty so that it can flow. When you release the illusion of ownership, life does not shrink, it expands. You see connections everywhere. The tree outside, the food on your plate, the breath in your lungs, they are not yours, but they are part of you in this moment. And because you do not own them, you are free to appreciate them fully, without fear of loss. The sting of separation softens when you see this clearly. What was never yours cannot truly be taken. What passes through your life was always meant to pass. The beauty lies in the passing itself, in the chance to touch, to know, to love without chains. Ownership is empty, but in that emptiness lies a fullness of experience that no possession could match. To walk this path requires practice. Each day, notice the language of mine as it arises. Ask yourself, is this truly mine, or is it simply here for now? Watch how possessions age, how people change, how even your body shifts moment by moment. Instead of tightening, soften. Instead of clinging, appreciate. Slowly, the fear of loss begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet trust in the flow of life. And as this trust deepens, grief transforms. It no longer feels like being robbed, but like saying goodbye at the end of a visit. Pain remains, but within it grows a seed of peace. The emptiness of ownership is not a void. It is freedom. It is the space that allows you to breathe without chains, to love without fear, to live without being bound by what cannot last. And when separation comes, as it always will, you bow to the truth. Nothing was ever yours, yet everything was always a gift. When we begin to loosen the grip of ownership, something remarkable comes into view. If nothing was ever truly ours to hold, then every connection, every moment of loss, every act of love or pain exists within something larger than just me and mine. Loss feels like a door slamming shut, but in the light of Buddhist wisdom, it is also a doorway opening into the deeper truth of interdependence. Your grief, your memories, even the very bond with the one you miss, all exist within an intricate web of causes and conditions. To see this is to understand that no loss is ever isolated, and no experience is ever meaningless. Karma is often misunderstood as punishment or reward, but at its heart, karma simply means action and its ripple. Every thought, word, and deed leaves an imprint, and those imprints weave together to create the fabric of our lives. When grief enters, it can feel like a rupture, like the thread of connection has been torn away forever. Yet when you look with deeper awareness, you see that the thread continues, woven into the tapestry in ways that are subtle but undeniable. The love someone gave you is not erased by their absence. It becomes part of how you speak, how you comfort, how you see the world. Their kindness moves through you into others, sometimes without you even realizing. Loss may change the form of the relationship, but the karmic connection continues its work. This understanding softens the despair of meaninglessness that grief often brings. The mind cries out, "What was the point if it all ends?" But karma teaches that nothing is ever wasted. Every act of care, every word of encouragement, every lesson taught or laugh shared becomes a seed planted in consciousness. Those seeds do not vanish. They grow in your life and in the lives you touch. A mother who taught patience may no longer be here, but her patience is alive in the way her child raises their own children. A friend's laughter echoes in the jokes you tell years later. The karmic web holds all of it, binding experiences into something larger than any single lifespan. Grief often feels lonely, as though you are carrying a weight that belongs only to you. But karma shows you that grief itself is not separate. Countless beings have felt the same ache. Countless beings are feeling it this very moment. The karmic web reveals that you are not a single, isolated point of pain. You are part of a shared human rhythm. This recognition allows compassion to arise. Instead of drowning in the belief that your suffering is meaningless, you see it as part of a vast ocean. And from this ocean, you can draw strength. You realize that the way you navigate your grief can ripple outward, offering comfort to others who walk through their own losses. Karmic interdependence also teaches that relationships never truly end. The form may shift, but the influence continues. Think of a candle lighting another candle. Even if the first flame burns out, its light lives on in the second, the third, and beyond. Every person you have loved continues to burn in this way, their impact carried forward in you and beyond you. This is not wishful thinking. It is the reality of interdependence. The world is shaped by the web of actions and connections, and every loss is woven into that web. Even sorrow becomes part of the story, shaping compassion, resilience, and understanding in ways that would not exist without it. This perspective does not erase pain, but it reframes it. Instead of asking, "Why me?" the question becomes, "What can grow from this?" Grief becomes not just an ending, but a transformation. The pain of loss can become the soil for deeper kindness, the ground for wisdom, the spark for action that benefits others. When you see your grief as part of a karmic chain, it shifts from something that isolates you to something that empowers you. You realize that even suffering has the potential to become medicine, not only for yourself, but for others. It also allows you to release some of the guilt that often hides inside grief. When someone we love dies, part of us wonders what we could have done differently, as if ownership of their fate belonged to us. But karma shows us that every life is shaped by countless causes and conditions, far beyond the control of any single person. The weather, the body, chance encounters, the choices of others, all of these threads come together. No one owns the outcome. Understanding this does not mean shrugging responsibility for our actions, but it frees us from the illusion that we alone could have prevented the loss. This recognition brings both humility and peace. The web of interdependence also shifts how we see memory. Memories are not static possessions. They are living movements of karma. When you remember someone you love, you activate their influence in the present. Their words guide your decisions. Their values shape your choices. Their presence colors your emotions. Memory itself becomes a continuation of the karmic link. And each time you act in harmony with the best of what they gave you, you extend their presence into the world. In this way, grief becomes a form of continuation rather than only rupture. This insight can bring profound comfort. The one you mourn is not sealed away in the past. Their influence flows into the present through the karmic web. Perhaps in a gesture you now make unconsciously, or in a phrase you repeat, or in the way you comfort someone else. In all these ways, their being still ripples through the world. No loss is truly final, because no connection is ever isolated. Seeing grief through karma also transforms how you relate to others still alive. You become more aware of the seeds you are planting now. You notice the power of small actions, how a kind word can linger for decades, how a moment of neglect can leave scars, how generosity can ripple outward beyond what you will ever witness. Knowing that everything you do becomes part of the web encourages you to live more mindfully. You realize that even in your pain, you can plant seeds of healing. Even in sorrow, you can contribute to the well-being of others. This is where grief itself becomes a teacher. When you suffer, you touch the universal fabric of human pain. That contact can break you open to compassion. You begin to see others not as strangers, but as companions on the same path of loss and love. Karma links you to them, just as it links you to those you mourn. The illusion of isolation begins to fade. You recognize the shared humanity beneath all appearances, and this recognition is the seed of wisdom. None of this denies the sharpness of loss. It does not mean you should not cry or feel anger or ache in your bones. Buddhism does not ask you to suppress what is real. Instead, it invites you to hold that pain within a larger truth. You grieve, but you grieve within the web of interdependence. You cry, but you cry knowing your tears are part of a river that has flowed through countless lives. You miss the one you love, but you miss them knowing that their presence continues in subtle but undeniable ways. Over time, this awareness changes the way you carry grief. It becomes less of a stone in your chest and more of a current that moves through you. You stop asking it to disappear and instead allow it to teach you. The loss becomes not only a wound, but a source of depth. You grow roots of compassion that reach into the soil of shared humanity. You grow wings of wisdom that rise above the illusion of isolation. You begin to live with a gentler heart, a heart that knows everything is connected, that nothing is wasted, that even in death, influence continues. Karmic interdependence dissolves the lie of meaninglessness. No loss is meaningless because no life is separate. Everything you have shared, everything you have loved, everything you have lost has become part of a greater whole, and in that whole, nothing disappears. It only changes form, continues its ripple, and shapes what comes next. To see this is to find comfort not by denying grief, but by letting it reveal its hidden depth. In the web of karma, nothing stands alone, and nothing is ever truly gone. When we begin to see grief through the web of karma, the heaviness of loss feels less like an isolated burden and more like part of something vast and deeply connected. Yet, even with this understanding, there is still the struggle of how to live with sorrow day by day. Some people collapse under its weight, drowning in memories, unable to breathe beneath the waves. Others shut down, numbing themselves, pretending not to feel at all. Both extremes create more suffering. One leaves you paralyzed by emotion, the other disconnects you from life itself. The Buddha offered a path between these two, the middle way, a way of holding grief without being consumed by it, a way of opening to sorrow without being destroyed. This principle of balance is not about denial. It is not about silencing tears or rushing toward forced positivity. It is about learning to stay present with what arises without losing yourself to extremes. To drown in grief is to lose the clarity of mind. Every thought, every sensation becomes tangled in sorrow until life itself feels unbearable. To numb yourself is to deny the truth. The heart hardens, the pain is buried, but in time it resurfaces stronger. The middle way shows that you do not need to choose between these two prisons. There is another path, one of steady presence and gentle awareness. The first step toward balance is acknowledging grief without judgment. Many people feel ashamed of their sorrow, thinking they should be strong or move on. Others indulge endlessly in grief, feeling almost guilty if they stop mourning, as if happiness would betray the memory of the one they lost. Both approaches are traps. The middle way invites you to meet grief honestly, without the need to suppress it or dramatize it. To say, yes, this hurts, and to stay with that truth. Pain is not a failure. It is a natural response to loss. Once acknowledged, grief can be held in awareness rather than resisted. Awareness means you notice the sadness, the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the body, without collapsing into it. You give grief space, but you do not give it the throne. This practice creates a gentle distance, enough to see that you are experiencing sorrow, but you are not only sorrow. In this space, clarity begins to return. The heart can feel without being drowned, and the mind can observe without turning numb. Balance also requires compassion for yourself. Too often, people treat themselves harshly in grief, judging their process, demanding they recover faster, or berating themselves for moments of joy. But compassion softens this rigidity. It allows you to rest when needed, to cry when needed, to smile when needed. Compassion recognizes that grief has no timetable. By offering yourself kindness, you step out of extremes and into a gentler middle ground. Breath is a powerful tool here. In Buddhism, the breath is often called the bridge between body and mind. When sorrow rises like a storm, returning to the breath anchors you, not by pushing the grief away, but by giving the body something steady to rest on. Each inhale and exhale becomes a reminder of balance, expansion and release, holding and letting go. This rhythm keeps you from spiraling into overwhelm and from retreating into numbness. It teaches you how to stay with what is happening right now, moment by moment. Balance also means allowing grief to come in waves rather than demanding constant stability. Some days will be heavier, some lighter. To walk the middle way is to accept these fluctuations without clinging to them. You do not curse the heavy days or grasp desperately at the lighter ones. You ride them as part of the process. This acceptance prevents the despair of thinking sorrow will last forever, and it avoids the denial of pretending it is gone too soon. Community is another anchor. Left alone, grief can distort the mind, convincing you that you are broken or alone in your suffering. But when you open to others, friends, family, or a sangha, you discover that grief is a shared human reality. Others can help hold your pain when it feels too heavy, and you can do the same for them in time. This mutual support keeps you from falling into isolation, which often leads to numbness, and from falling into despair, which often leads to overwhelm. Community keeps you balanced by reminding you that loss is not yours to bear alone. Mindful presence is essential. The mind loves to wander into the past, replaying every memory or into the future, fearing what life will look like without the one you've lost. Both directions can pull you into extremes. The middle way draws you back to now. What is happening in this breath, in this step, in this moment? When you anchor in the present, grief becomes something you can hold, rather than something that drowns you. The tears may still flow, but they flow in real time, not endlessly in a cycle of imagined past or future. Balance also involves allowing joy to return without guilt. Many resist happiness after loss, thinking it disrespects the memory of the one who is gone. But joy is not betrayal. It is part of healing. The middle way allows joy and sorrow to coexist, like sunlight and shadow. You can laugh and still grieve. You can smile and still miss them. Allowing both prevents you from becoming numb to joy and from being overwhelmed by sorrow. It is the balance of the heart holding multiple truths at once. Grief teaches patience. The middle way is not a shortcut, but a steady path. You may stumble toward numbness some days, or drown in sorrow on others. Balance is not perfection. It is the practice of returning again and again to the center. Just as a tightrope walker wobbles but regains footing, you wobble but return to presence. Over time, this becomes more natural. The extremes lose some of their pull, and the middle path feels steadier. This way of walking through grief also prepares you for the challenges of future losses. Each time you practice balance, you strengthen resilience. You learn that you can hold sorrow without breaking, and you can open to joy without guilt. This knowledge gives you courage. The fear of grief lessens because you know there is a way through. You no longer dread the pain of loss as something that will destroy you. You see it as part of life's rhythm, something you can meet with balance and grace. The middle way is not cold detachment. It is full engagement with life, but without being enslaved by extremes. It is the courage to feel deeply without drowning, and the wisdom to let go without going numb. In grief, this means living with both the ache of loss and the beauty of love at the same time. It means neither denying the depth of your sorrow nor allowing it to define your existence. It is a delicate dance, one that brings both dignity and freedom. When you begin to live this way, grief itself becomes a teacher. It shows you where you lean too far into numbness, where you collapse into despair, and where balance brings peace. It teaches you patience, compassion, and resilience. It shows you that the human heart is vast enough to hold both suffering and joy. And in this balance, grief becomes not just a wound, but a path to wisdom. Walking the middle way through loss allows you to emerge not untouched by pain, but touched in a way that deepens you. You discover that even in sorrow, life continues to move, breath continues to flow, moments continue to offer beauty. You learn that grief does not have to be a prison. With balance, it becomes a passage, not an escape, not a drowning, but a steady walk through the river of sorrow, one step at a time, until you emerge on the other side with a softer, stronger heart. When we learn to walk the middle way through grief, we discover that balance itself reshapes the heart. By neither drowning in sorrow nor shutting it out, we begin to see something unexpected rising from within the pain. Loss is not only about absence, it is also about a raw opening that can reveal a deeper form of compassion. In the vulnerability of grief, walls that once kept us apart from others start to thin. The very wound that hurts so much becomes the same opening through which empathy flows. Loss can carve channels in the heart, and through those channels, compassion begins to move. Sorrow strips away pretense. It takes away the illusion that we are untouchable or separate from suffering. When you grieve, you see how fragile human life truly is. You feel the weight of impermanence not as an abstract teaching, but as a truth written into your own body. This rawness can soften arrogance, dissolve pride, and make space for humility. In that humility, you begin to recognize the shared vulnerability of all beings. You realize that every person you meet carries their own story of loss, some visible, some hidden. The pain that once felt so personal becomes a bridge connecting you to countless others. This connection is not born from pity, it is born from recognition. When you see another grieving, your heart knows the terrain. You recognize the heaviness in their eyes, the silence in their voice, the weight in their posture. And instead of turning away, you lean closer. The loss you endured becomes the seed of empathy. You understand not only because you heard about suffering, but because you lived it. This kind of understanding cannot be taught by books or theories. It can only be carved by experience. Compassion hidden in loss also changes how you respond to others. Before, you might have judged someone's sadness or felt impatience with their pain. After walking through your own grief, you carry less judgment and more patience. You know that healing does not follow a neat timeline. You know that grief lingers in unexpected ways. This knowledge gives you the ability to hold space for others, to sit with their sorrow without trying to fix it or rush it away. You become the kind of presence that brings comfort simply by being steady. The Buddha often taught that suffering can become a doorway to compassion. Without suffering, we might remain blind to the truth that all beings are bound by the same conditions: birth, aging, illness, and death. But suffering cracks the illusion of separation. When grief touches you, it also awakens you to the suffering of others, human and non-human alike. You begin to notice the small sadnesses around you: the stray dog searching for food, the elder walking alone, the child crying in frustration. These sights no longer pass unnoticed. Your heart, broken open by loss, now responds with tenderness. This tenderness does not make you weaker. It makes you stronger in a different way. Compassion that arises from loss has depth and endurance. It is not shallow kindness that disappears when inconvenient. It is compassion born from knowing what it feels like to ache, and from the desire that others not carry their pain alone. This compassion often leads to action. Many who have endured deep loss find themselves drawn to help others, volunteering, listening, serving, giving. The sorrow that could have hardened them instead transforms into motivation to ease suffering where they can. There is also a hidden wisdom in this compassion. When you suffer, you learn the limits of words. You learn that sometimes silence carries more healing than advice. You learn that presence can soothe more than solutions. This wisdom shapes the way you offer compassion. Instead of trying to solve another's grief, you simply accompany them. Instead of filling their silence with explanations, you honor it with your own. This is the kind of compassion that does not push or force, but allows healing to unfold naturally. The rawness of loss also teaches you sensitivity. Grief makes the world feel sharper, the air colder, the nights longer, the absence heavier. This sensitivity can be overwhelming at first, but over time, it becomes a channel for empathy. You notice details others overlook: the strain in someone's voice, the slight tremor in their hands, the way they avoid certain words. You learn to listen beneath the surface. You learn to see the hidden pain. This capacity to notice is part of the compassion that loss awakens. It allows you to be present not only with your own sorrow, but with the quiet sorrows of others. Compassion born from grief also dismantles the illusion of superiority. When life is smooth, it is easy to think suffering belongs to others, that somehow we are exempt. Loss removes that illusion. It shows us that no one escapes. Death, endings, change, these touch every life. With this realization, the heart softens toward everyone. You begin to see the universality of struggle, the shared humanity beneath all appearances. Even those you once disliked or resented become easier to view with compassion, because you know they too will lose, they too will grieve. This recognition expands your capacity for forgiveness. Holding on to resentment seems less important when you realize how fragile and brief life truly is. Loss teaches you that clinging to anger only deepens suffering. Compassion reminds you that those who caused harm were also shaped by their own struggles, their own blind spots. Forgiveness becomes less about excusing and more about releasing the poison of resentment from your own heart. In this way, Compassion not only heals others, but heals you. At its core, compassion hidden in loss is a transformation of energy. The pain of grief is powerful. It can crush, but it can also be redirected. When allowed to open the heart rather than close it, grief's energy becomes the fuel for empathy, kindness, and service. The very depth of your sorrow gives depth to your compassion. And this transformation is not forced. It unfolds naturally when you allow yourself to feel fully, to soften rather than harden, to stay present rather than numb. Loss also teaches the impermanence of joy and suffering alike. Knowing that your grief will not last forever, just as your joy did not, gives you perspective. This perspective allows you to walk alongside others with steadiness. You no longer need to promise them that their sorrow will disappear quickly. You simply remind them that it will change, that nothing stays the same. This reassurance, simple as it is, carries profound comfort. It comes not from theory, but from your own lived truth. There is also a subtle compassion that extends beyond human beings. When grief strips you open, you feel more deeply the vulnerability of all life. You notice the fragility of plants, the fleeting lives of insects, the cycles of birth and death everywhere. This awareness can spark a broader compassion, one that extends to all living beings. The sorrow you carry becomes a doorway to reverence for life itself. The Buddha's teachings often speak of boundless compassion, compassion that knows no boundary of self or other. Loss can be the training ground for this. As your grief humbles you, as it reveals your connection to others, your compassion grows wider. It becomes less about comforting only those you love and more about wishing all beings freedom from suffering. This boundless compassion arises not from ignoring your pain, but from allowing it to expand your heart beyond its former limits. Grief will always carry pain. It is not something to romanticize, but within the rawness of that pain lies a hidden gift. The same loss that breaks you can also break you open. The same sorrow that weighs you down can also connect you to others. The compassion that emerges is not sentimental. It is strong, resilient, and deeply human. It does not erase grief, but it makes grief bearable. It does not undo loss, but it transforms how you carry it. When compassion awakens through loss, it reshapes the way you live. You become more gentle, more attentive, more aware of the hidden struggles in those around you. You learn to speak with kindness, to listen with patience, to act with care. And you discover that by easing another's pain, even in small ways, your own heart begins to heal. In this way, grief does not end in emptiness. It ends in connection. Loss becomes the soil from which compassion grows, and compassion becomes the bridge that carries you forward. When compassion awakens through loss, the heart becomes softer and more open, but it also begins to sense a deeper truth pulsing beneath all sorrow, the certainty of death. Every act of kindness, every tear, every connection is shaped by this truth. Where most people turn away, Buddhist practice invites us to look directly at it, not to frighten ourselves, not to live in despair, but to awaken a greater vitality and courage. This practice is called Maranasati, the contemplation of death, and it is not a morbid obsession. It is a mirror that shows us what really matters. To contemplate death is to recognize that every breath is uncertain. Monks reflect daily on the truth that life could end at any moment. This awareness is not meant to paralyze, but to sharpen presence. When you know time is fragile, you stop wasting it on trivialities. The mind, usually caught in endless distractions, becomes focused. The heart, usually tangled in attachment, becomes tender. This contemplation turns death from a shadow we fear into a teacher we respect. Many fear that thinking of death will breed hopelessness, but in practice, the opposite happens. When you bring mortality into awareness, you stop postponing life. You no longer say, "One day I will love fully," or "Someday I will forgive." You realize that someday may never arrive, and so you begin now. Maranasati cuts through procrastination, through numbness, through the illusion that life stretches endlessly ahead. It presses you to live with honesty, to speak with sincerity, to give your best while you can. Death contemplation also strips away vanity. We cling to youth, to status, to possessions, but death reminds us that none of these will endure. The face in the mirror will change, the body will falter, the titles will fade. Knowing this does not rob life of joy, it deepens it. You begin to see beauty not in permanence, but in transience. The lines on a face, the fragility of a flower, the laughter that ends too quickly, these become precious precisely because they will not last. Death teaches appreciation in a way nothing else can. Maranasati also nurtures courage. Fear of death is at the root of many anxieties. We avoid risks, silence truths, or cling to comfort because death looms unacknowledged in the background. By contemplating death directly, the fear loses some of its grip. You learn that death is not a punishment, but a natural part of existence. This recognition dissolves much of the hidden terror that controls choices. It frees you to live with more boldness, to take steps aligned with your deepest values instead of being governed by fear. This practice is not about imagining dramatic scenes of dying, but about noticing impermanence in daily life. Monks reflect on how breath itself is uncertain, how each inhale depends on conditions that cannot be guaranteed. They reflect on how food, health, and relationships all rest on fragile threads. By observing these truths calmly, they build resilience. The mind grows accustomed to change, and death becomes less of a shock. It is seen as the final expression of a process that has been happening all along. Contemplating death also clarifies priorities. The small irritations that consume so much energy, the arguments, the grudges, the endless striving, lose their weight when seen against the certainty of mortality. Ask yourself, if today were your last day, would this matter? Often, the answer is no. This question can be a compass, guiding you toward what is meaningful: connection, compassion, honesty, presence. Death contemplation brings perspective, helping you see what is essential and what is noise. Another gift of Maranasati is tenderness. When you know that every person you meet will one day die, your interactions change. Harshness softens. Patience grows. You hold people more gently because you know their time is limited. Even those who frustrate you are recognized as fragile beings moving toward the same end. This awareness can transform relationships. It becomes harder to cling to resentment when you remember that all of us are temporary travelers. The practice also strengthens gratitude. Each sunrise, each meal, each conversation becomes a blessing when you acknowledge it could be the last. Gratitude becomes less about listing good things and more about a lived awareness of impermanence. The ordinary turns luminous. Washing dishes, hearing rain, holding someone's hand, these are no longer overlooked. They are honored because they are fleeting. Death contemplation awakens gratitude not as a practice of words, but as a natural response to seeing clearly. Maranasati also builds resilience in the face of actual loss. When death comes to someone you love, the shock is immense. But if you have trained the mind to remember that death is woven into life, the grief, though still heavy, becomes less suffocating. You recognize that death was never an intrusion, but part of the pattern. This recognition does not erase sorrow, but it frames it in understanding, which makes carrying it more bearable. There is also freedom in releasing denial. Much of modern culture hides death, treating it as taboo, something to avoid at all costs. This denial breeds fear. By practicing death contemplation, you strip away the taboo. Death becomes part of life's conversation. It no longer lurks unspoken in the shadows. It is faced directly, calmly. And in that facing, freedom arises. Denial shrinks, fear weakens, and acceptance grows. Maranasati deepens spiritual urgency. The Buddha often reminded his followers that life is precious because it is uncertain. To waste it in distraction is to squander a rare opportunity. Contemplating death daily reminds you to practice, to cultivate wisdom and compassion now. You do not wait until conditions are perfect, because you know they may never be. This urgency is not anxious, but alive. It infuses each day with purpose. Death contemplation also bridges the gap between self and others. When you acknowledge that you, your loved ones, and even those you dislike all share the same fate, barriers soften. You see the equality in mortality. No status, wealth, or power can protect anyone. This recognition fosters humility and empathy. It reminds you that beneath all differences, we are bound by the same truth. We are temporary, fragile, and interdependent. There is a paradox here. By contemplating death, life feels more vivid. Many discover that joy actually increases. Colors seem brighter, relationships feel deeper, moments feel fuller. This is because death contemplation removes the illusion of endlessness. It brings life into sharp relief. You taste it more fully because you know it will not last. This paradox is at the heart of Maranasati. The more you accept death, the more alive you become. This practice also strengthens resolve. When challenges arise, you remind yourself that life is short. Why waste it avoiding growth? Why waste it chasing illusions? Death contemplation pushes you toward authenticity. It encourages you to live in alignment with your values, to speak truths you might otherwise withhold, to take steps you might otherwise fear. Knowing time is finite adds weight to your choices and courage to your actions. Maranasati also purifies the heart. Resentments, attachments, and petty desires lose their grip when seen in the light of death. Holding on to anger feels foolish when you remember that both you and the one you resent will soon be gone. Clinging to possessions feels empty when you know you cannot carry them. This purification is not forced, but arises naturally. Death becomes a teacher that simplifies life, stripping away the unnecessary and leaving only what matters. The practice is not about morbidity, it is about clarity. To look at death without fear is to look at life without distortion. It frees you from illusions of permanence, from the chase for security that can never be found. It opens the heart to love more deeply, to live more honestly, and to face the unknown with courage. Death does not need to be the enemy. It can be the teacher that awakens us to the fullness of life. Through Maranasati, grief and loss also take on a different tone. They remain painful, but they also become reminders of truth. Each death you encounter becomes a call to presence, a reminder to live wisely, to love fully, to waste no moment. In this way, death contemplation transforms sorrow into fuel for awakening. When practiced daily, Maranasati reshapes the way you carry yourself. You become more grounded, more grateful, more fearless. You stop wasting energy on illusions and start investing in what endures: compassion, wisdom, presence. And when your own death approaches, you will not meet it as a stranger. You will meet it as a teacher you have known all along. That is the gift of contemplating death, not once in fear, but daily in courage. When death contemplation becomes part of daily awareness, the fear of endings softens. You no longer see death as an interruption, but as a truth woven into every breath. Yet the Buddha pointed to something even larger, a teaching that holds not only individual death, but the whole cycle of existence itself. This teaching is samsara, the endless turning of birth and death, joy and sorrow, gain and loss. To understand samsara is to understand that loss is not a cruel exception to life's plan. It is part of the rhythm that has always been. And when you begin to see loss through this wider lens, the grip of despair loosens and a new kind of acceptance begins to rise. Samsara is often described as the wheel of life, the cycle that keeps turning with no pause. Every being is caught in this turning, moving through birth, aging, death, and rebirth. What makes this teaching powerful in the context of grief is that it reframes loss, not as something that happened only to you, but as something that is part of the shared rhythm of all existence. You see that just as waves rise and fall in the ocean, so too do beings appear and pass away. No wave curses the ocean for its rise and fall. It is simply the nature of the sea. In the same way, no life can resist the rhythm of samsara. When grief strikes, the mind often asks, "Why me? Why now? Why this?" The wheel of samsara answers with a deeper truth. This is not punishment. This is the law of existence. Nothing escapes change. Nothing remains untouched by loss. To see this does not remove sorrow, but it removes the sense of being singled out by fate. Your loss becomes part of the larger turning, something every being shares in countless forms. This recognition connects you to the vastness of life rather than isolating you in personal despair. Samsara also teaches that clinging is what deepens suffering. The cycle itself is neutral. It is our attachment that makes it feel unbearable. When we demand permanence from what is designed to change, the wheel feels cruel. But when we learn to let go, to release the demand that things remain as they were, the wheel reveals itself as simply life unfolding. This is why samsara becomes a teacher of letting go. It shows us again and again that clinging only brings pain, and release brings peace. Letting go does not mean forgetting or denying. It means allowing life to move without insisting it freeze in place. It means holding love fully while it is here and releasing it when it transforms. Samsara shows us that everything transforms. Nothing is destroyed completely. It only shifts form. The tree becomes ash. The ash nourishes the soil grows new life. In the same way, relationships, bodies, and experiences do not vanish into nothingness. They flow into new expressions, visible or unseen. This perspective softens the harshness of loss, reminding us that change is not the end, but the continuation of the cycle. This cycle also brings humility. In times of joy, we forget that sorrow will return. In times of sorrow, we forget that joy will come again. Samsara teaches that both are inevitable, neither permanent. By remembering this, you loosen the grip of both pride and despair. You learn to meet joy with gratitude rather than arrogance, and to meet sorrow with patience rather than hopelessness. This balance creates equanimity, the steady heart that can stay open no matter which part of the cycle appears. Another lesson of samsara is compassion. When you see that every being is caught in this same cycle, you recognize that everyone knows loss, everyone knows grief, everyone knows the fragility of what they love. This recognition deepens empathy. You see the universality of sorrow and respond with kindness rather than judgment. The grief you carry is no longer a private prison, but a doorway into shared humanity. And this compassion eases your own pain because it reminds you that you are not alone. Samsara also shows the futility of control. We spend much of life trying to manage outcomes, to hold on to what pleases us and push away what hurts. But the wheel keeps turning, indifferent to our demands. No matter how tightly we cling, the cycle of gain and loss continues. To fight this is to exhaust yourself against reality. To accept it is to find freedom. You learn to ride the wheel rather than be crushed by it. You stop demanding that it spin your way and begin to flow with its rhythm. This acceptance is not passive, it is wise. It saves energy wasted on resistance and directs it toward presence, compassion, and understanding. Loss, when seen through samsara, becomes less of a rupture and more of a reminder. It reminds you that nothing was ever permanent, that every joy was always temporary, and that this truth is shared by all. The pain remains, but it is softened by perspective. The grief is still real, but it no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like participation in the cycle that has always been. And in that recognition, peace begins to grow. This teaching also invites reflection on your own attachments. Every time you lose, you are shown what you cling to most. Each grief reveals the places where the heart holds tightly. Samsara teaches you to see these moments not only as suffering, but as lessons. Each loss becomes an opportunity to practice letting go, to loosen the grip, to soften the demand for permanence. With each practice, the heart grows more resilient, more able to love without fear of loss, more able to release without bitterness. Samsara is not meant to depress or discourage. It is meant to awaken. To see that life is cyclic is to stop searching for a final escape in worldly things. It is to recognize that true freedom lies not in trying to control the wheel, but in stepping outside its grip through wisdom and compassion. Until then, samsara serves as a teacher, reminding us again and again, let go, let go, let go. By holding grief within the vision of samsara, you learn to live differently. You live with less clinging and more appreciation, less resistance and more acceptance. You stop asking the cycle to change and instead learn from it. Each loss becomes not only a wound, but a teaching. Each ending becomes not only sorrow, but a reminder of life's rhythm. And in time, this rhythm becomes less frightening and more sacred. When you understand samsara, loss no longer feels like an error in the script of life. It feels like part of the story itself. You see that everything you love will pass, but also that everything you lose is part of the same cycle that allows love to exist at all. Without endings, beginnings would not shine. Without sorrow, joy would not be felt. Samsara holds both, endlessly turning, endlessly teaching, and by listening to its lesson, you learn the art of letting go. When we begin to see samsara not as a cruel trick, but as a rhythm that includes both gain and loss, joy and sorrow, we start to loosen our grip and allow life to flow more naturally. Yet even with this wider view, grief can still feel heavy and unbearable. The Buddha did not deny this weight. He began his teaching by naming it directly. The first noble truth speaks of dukkha, the reality of suffering, and far from being a message of despair, it offers clarity. To acknowledge suffering is to shine light where the mind would rather stay blind. In bereavement, this truth becomes a guide that steadies the heart, reminding us that sorrow is not a mistake, but a part of life's fabric. When someone we love dies, or when we lose something precious, the instinct is often to ask why. Why should this happen? Why should life be so cruel? The noble truth of suffering does not answer with excuses. It answers with honesty. Suffering is part of existence. To grieve is not to fail. It is to meet life as it is. This clarity removes the sense of personal punishment. The pain of loss is not because you did something wrong or because life singled you out. It is because everything that arises also passes away. To see this directly is painful, but it is also freeing because it takes away the illusion that suffering is abnormal. This acknowledgement prevents denial. Many try to avoid grief by pretending it should not exist, by numbing themselves with distractions, or by forcing themselves into false positivity. But the first noble truth invites us to face grief head-on. It does not sugarcoat or minimize. It says, yes, loss hurts. Yes, endings bring sorrow. To deny this is to deepen suffering. To accept it is to begin healing. By looking directly at the wound, you allow it to breathe, and in that openness, space for transformation appears. The truth of suffering also brings companionship. If all beings experience dukkha, then grief is not yours alone. It is not a private exile, but a shared human condition. Every tear you shed is echoed in countless others across time and space. To see this is to realize that grief does not isolate you. It connects you. This recognition can soften the loneliness that loss often brings. It allows compassion to rise for yourself and for others, because you see that sorrow is not unique to your story, but part of the story of life itself. Applying the first noble truth to bereavement also strips away unnecessary layers of guilt. Often when someone dies, the mind plays endless games of what if and if only. What if I had done more? If only I had said something different. But the noble truth reminds us that suffering is woven into the nature of existence. Death is not caused by your personal failings, but by the impermanence of life. To accept this does not remove the pain, but it releases the burden of self-blame. It allows you to grieve with honesty rather than with unnecessary torment. This teaching also clears the fog of confusion. Loss often disorients, leaving you unsure how to make sense of the world. The noble truth acts like a compass, pointing to the reality that endings are part of the path. It does not pretend that grief will vanish quickly, but it gives you a framework to hold it. Instead of feeling lost in a meaningless void, you see that your pain has context. It is part of what it means to be alive. This context itself brings relief, because what we can name, we can begin to work with. Another gift of this truth is that it prevents the spiral of resentment. Without clarity, grief can easily turn into bitterness. Life is unfair, others have more. Why me? But when you remember that suffering is universal, resentment loses its fuel. You see that no one escapes. The wealthy, the powerful, the wise, all encounter loss. This levels the ground of human experience. You are not being targeted. You are sharing in the same reality that has touched every being. This humility can quiet anger and replace it with compassion. The noble truth also invites deeper inquiry. If suffering is inherent in life, what causes it to intensify? Here the Buddha pointed to attachment and craving. In grief, attachment is raw. We want the loved one back. We want the past to remain. We crave what cannot be. Recognizing this does not mean we should not love. It means we see clearly how clinging to permanence in an impermanent world multiplies our pain. By gently loosening this grip, we do not erase love. We allow it to be love without chains. This clarity transforms grief from endless torment into a process of release. In bereavement, applying the first noble truth also teaches patience. Suffering cannot be rushed away. Just as a wound needs time to heal, grief needs time to unfold. Knowing that suffering is part of life allows you to give yourself permission to take that time. You no longer demand instant recovery, nor do you feel ashamed of your sorrow. You understand that healing is not about skipping suffering, but about walking through it with awareness. This truth also has a way of awakening gratitude. When you accept that loss is inevitable, the moments you did share become more precious. Instead of focusing only on the absence, you begin to honor the presence that once was. The laughter, the kindness, the shared silence all become gifts because you recognize that none of them were owed to you. They were fleeting blessings, and their impermanence makes them shine even brighter in memory. The first noble truth also dissolves the illusion that suffering has no purpose. While pain itself is not a gift, the clarity it brings can be. Grief forces you to stop, to reflect, to feel. It breaks open the heart's complacency and shows you what truly matters. This is not to romanticize loss, but to acknowledge that through sorrow, deeper wisdom can arise. By applying this truth, you transform grief from something that feels meaningless into something that teaches you about life's essence. This clarity does not make suffering pleasant, but it makes it bearable. Instead of resisting grief as if it should not exist, you hold it knowing it is part of the path. This shift turns grief from an enemy into a companion, harsh but honest. And in walking with this companion, you grow stronger, more compassionate, more awake. In this way, the first noble truth applied to bereavement is not a message of despair, but of reality. It tells you that grief is not failure, not punishment, not abnormal. It is life. And by accepting life as it is, with its sorrow as well as its joy, you begin to find peace in the very place you once thought peace was impossible. When we begin to understand the first noble truth as a mirror of life's nature rather than a sentence of despair, we gain the strength to face grief without denial. But seeing suffering clearly is only the beginning. The question then arises, how do we keep sorrow from swallowing us whole? The mind, left unchecked, spins endless stories, revisits every memory, predicts painful futures, and traps us in cycles of regret and longing. This is where mindfulness becomes medicine. By anchoring awareness in the present moment, mourning transforms from a spiral of torment into a path of steady healing. Mindful presence in grief does not mean trying to push sorrow away. It means staying with what is here now, instead of being lost in what has already passed or what may never come. When you lose someone, the mind is often dragged back into the past, replaying conversations, remembering small details, or wishing you could relive a moment one more time. Or it leaps into the future, worrying about how you will manage, fearing the weight of absence stretching endlessly ahead. Neither past nor future can be touched or changed. They are shadows of thought. The present moment, however, is real. In the present, you have breath. In the present, you have ground beneath your feet. In the present, you have the capacity to take one step, then another. This is where healing begins. Mindful mourning asks us to notice grief without adding extra layers. The ache in your chest is real, but the story that you will never feel peace again is not. The tear on your cheek is real, but the idea that you are broken forever is not. Presence teaches us to separate the raw experience of loss from the mind's endless narrative about it. This does not erase sorrow, but it keeps it honest. You feel sadness as sadness, not as 1,000 imagined futures piled onto it. This honesty lightens the burden. Anchoring in the present also prevents the numbness that often follows grief. When sorrow feels too large, the instinct is to shut down, to go on autopilot. But mindfulness brings attention even to the small details of daily life. The sound of water as you wash your hands, the feeling of air filling your lungs, the warmth of sunlight across your skin. These simple experiences, noticed fully, keep you connected to life. They remind you that even in the midst of mourning, moments of peace and beauty exist. You do not need to escape grief entirely to feel them. They live side by side with sorrow if you are awake enough to notice. Mindful presence also creates space for emotions to flow instead of being trapped. When you sit with grief, you allow it to rise and fall naturally, like waves on the shore. Suppression only buries it deeper, and indulgence only magnifies it. Presence finds the middle path. You acknowledge the feeling, you breathe with it, and you let it pass when it is ready. This practice prevents emotions from hardening into bitterness or despair. It gives them permission to move, to change, to evolve. The breath becomes an anchor in this process. Each inhale and exhale is a reminder that you are alive in this moment, that life continues even in loss. When the mind spins with regrets or fears, returning to the breath grounds you. It is not about making the pain vanish, but about creating steadiness. You cannot stop the storm of grief, but you can hold on to the breath as a rope that keeps you from being swept away. The body knows how to breathe, even when the heart feels shattered. Trusting this rhythm teaches you that you, too, can keep moving through sorrow. Mindful mourning also deepens awareness of impermanence. In grief, it can feel as if the pain will never end. But by paying attention, you notice that even sorrow changes. It may feel heavy one moment, lighter the next, sharp one day, dull the next. This constant shifting shows that grief, like all things, is impermanent. Seeing this directly helps you trust that while loss will always leave its mark, the intensity of pain will not remain fixed forever. Awareness of this change gives hope, not in the sense of pretending the loss did not matter, but in the sense of recognizing that healing is possible because nothing stays frozen. Another medicine of presence is the way it softens the tendency of the mind to compare. In grief, it is common to think of others who seem to be coping better, or to recall times when you felt stronger. These comparisons deepen suffering. Mindfulness cuts through by returning you to your own experience here and now. This moment is not about anyone else's path. It is about breathing with your own grief, your own heart. Staying present reminds you that healing does not follow another person's timetable, nor does it need to. It unfolds moment by moment, uniquely for you. Presence also nourishes gratitude, even within sorrow. When you stop running from grief and sit with it, you may begin to notice small sparks of thankfulness. Perhaps it is gratitude for having loved at all, gratitude for memories that remain, gratitude for the support of others, or even gratitude for simple life continuing around you. These moments of gratitude are not forced. They arise naturally when you are awake to the present. And they provide balance, reminding you that loss is not the only truth. Love, connection, and care are still present. The practice of mindful mourning also invites silence. Silence can feel uncomfortable at first, especially when grief makes the mind loud with thoughts. But when you allow silence, you begin to hear more clearly. The quiet pulse of your own heart, the subtle rise and fall of emotions, the depth of your longing. This kind of listening is medicine because it allows grief to express itself without needing to be fixed. It gives sorrow dignity, and within that dignity, healing slowly unfolds. By anchoring yourself in presence, you also avoid being trapped by regrets. The mind loves to revisit the past with guilt, things said or unsaid, actions taken or not taken. Mindfulness does not erase these regrets, but it prevents them from multiplying endlessly. You notice them as thoughts, not as truths written in stone. You breathe and you let them pass. This keeps you from being imprisoned by a past you cannot change. It reminds you that healing can only happen now, in this moment, not in endless reruns of what is gone. The medicine of presence also strengthens resilience. Each time you stay with grief without fleeing, you prove to yourself that you can bear it. Each moment of mindful breathing is a victory over despair. Slowly, this builds trust in yourself. You realize that you do not need to be afraid of emotions. You can feel them fully and still remain steady. This resilience becomes a foundation not only for grieving, but for all of life's challenges. Mindful mourning can also awaken compassion. As you sit with your own pain, you become more aware of the pain of others. You recognize the universality of sorrow, and this recognition makes you gentler. Compassion becomes less of an effort and more of a natural response. The very act of being present with your own suffering makes you more capable of being present with the suffering of others. In this way, your grief becomes a teacher, not just for your own healing, but for the healing you can offer to others. Staying present also prevents grief from hardening into identity. It is easy to start thinking, "I am broken. I am nothing without this person. I am defined by my loss." Mindfulness reveals these as thoughts, not truths. You are more than your grief. You are the awareness that can observe grief. You are the presence that remains even as sorrow rises and falls. This realization frees you from being trapped in a story of permanent damage. It reminds you that identity itself is fluid, and that grief, though powerful, does not define the whole of who you are. Finally, mindfulness gives permission for joy to return. When you are present, you notice not only sorrow, but also small moments of light. The smile of a child, the taste of food, the warmth of connection. Grief does not erase these, it only blinds you to them. By practicing presence, you begin to see them again. This does not mean forgetting the one you lost or pretending grief is gone. It means allowing joy and sorrow to live side by side. And in that coexistence, life becomes whole again. The medicine of mindful presence in mourning is simple yet profound. It does not take away loss, but it prevents grief from spiraling into endless suffering. It anchors you in what is real, steadies you when the mind races, and opens you to both the pain and the beauty of life as it unfolds. By staying present, you discover that even in sorrow, there is ground beneath your feet, breath in your lungs, and space in your heart for healing to grow. When we learn the medicine of mindful presence, grief no longer spirals into endless suffering. We begin to see that staying anchored in the here and now gives us room to breathe, room to feel, room to live without being swallowed by the weight of absence. Yet within that presence, another question emerges. What do we do with the love that remains? The heart still longs, still aches, still clings to the one who is gone. It feels almost unbearable, as if all that love has nowhere to go. Buddhism points to a transformation, a way of shifting love from a narrow attachment into boundless metta, or universal loving kindness. This is not a denial of your personal bond. It is its expansion. It is letting the love you once held for one being flow outward into all beings, without limit. Clinging love feels heavy because it insists on ownership. It says, "You are mine, and without you, I cannot be whole." This love, while sincere, carries chains. It ties our happiness to conditions we cannot control, and when those conditions change, the chains tighten, bringing suffering. Boundless metta, by contrast, is love without chains. It says, "May you be happy, may you be free, may all beings share in peace." It does not demand return. It does not demand permanence. It does not demand possession. It simply flows, like sunlight warming everything without discrimination. The shift from clinging love to metta does not happen overnight. It begins by recognizing the difference between love that binds and love that frees. Possessive love often hides fear, the fear of being alone, the fear of losing identity, the fear of emptiness. Metta arises when fear dissolves into compassion. It sees that all beings suffer, all beings long for happiness, all beings are fragile in their own way. When you extend love to this shared vulnerability, your grief softens. The love that once clung to one person begins to grow into a love that holds the whole world. One way this transformation unfolds is by reflecting on the essence of the person you lost. The qualities you cherished, their kindness, their humor, their presence. These qualities are not confined to one individual. They exist in countless others. By training the heart to see these qualities wherever they appear, your love continues, but it is no longer trapped in a single form. You might notice kindness in a stranger, laughter in a child, presence in a friend. Each recognition becomes a way of honoring the one you lost while expanding love beyond them. Metta also helps dissolve the bitterness of grief. When love clings, loss feels like robbery. But when love expands, loss becomes a channel. Instead of asking, "Why was this taken from me?" you begin to ask, "How can I let the love I carry flow into the world?" This change of question transforms grief into purpose. The energy of longing that once felt suffocating becomes fuel for generosity, for kindness, for connection. You discover that the love you thought was lost is still alive, not in the same form, but in the way it now moves through you. This practice also rewires how you see yourself. Clinging love often creates dependency. My identity rests on being someone's partner, someone's child, someone's friend. When that person is gone, the self feels shattered. Metta shifts the ground. It reveals that love is not something you lost, but something you are capable of giving endlessly. It shows that your worth is not tied to one relationship, but to your capacity to radiate care without boundaries. This realization is deeply healing. It reminds you that you are not empty. You are a vessel overflowing with love that can be shared again and again. Another aspect of this transformation is the dissolving of barriers. Clinging love draws a line. This one is mine and others are outside. Metta erases that line. It recognizes that every being longs for safety, happiness, and peace, just as your loved one did. When you extend the same wish you once held for them, "May you be free from suffering," to all beings, your love widens until it becomes universal. In this widening, the pain of separation lessens, because the heart learns to love without exclusion. The practice of metta meditation can help here. Sitting quietly, you begin by sending kindness to yourself. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Then you extend it to the one you lost. May you be at peace. May you be free from pain. From there, you expand outward, to friends, to strangers, even to those you struggle with. Eventually, the circle widens to include all beings, everywhere. This gradual expansion retrains the heart to release clinging and embrace boundlessness. Over time, you realize that your personal grief has become a doorway to a love far larger than yourself. Metta also brings healing to anger, which often hides inside grief. Anger at death, anger at fate, anger at yourself or others. By practicing loving kindness, you soften this hardness. You recognize that anger itself comes from love disrupted. When you redirect that energy into metta, the anger dissolves, leaving only compassion. This does not mean you stop grieving. It means your grief no longer poisons you. It becomes fertile soil for kindness. Boundless love also shifts how you relate to the memory of the one you lost. Instead of freezing them in the past, you let their memory inspire you in the present. Each act of kindness you perform becomes a continuation of their presence. Each moment of love extended to another carries their echo. In this way, metta becomes a living memorial. The one you lost continues not only in your heart, but in your actions. Grief becomes not just absence, but continuity, not just pain, but transformation. This transformation also brings resilience. When love is clinging, any threat of loss shakes the foundation of your life. But when love becomes boundless, it cannot be destroyed. Even if people come and go, even if life shifts in unexpected ways, the love itself remains. It flows wherever it is needed, unshaken by change. This kind of love is unbreakable because it is no longer tied to conditions. It becomes your natural state of being. The beauty of this practice is that it honors both the personal and the universal. You do not deny the love you had for the one who is gone. You use it as fuel. You let it expand outward until it embraces all beings. This way, your grief is not wasted. It becomes the very ground from which compassion grows. The love you thought was gone becomes more vast, more radiant, more enduring than ever. In transforming clinging love into boundless metta, you do not lose what was precious. You release it from chains and allow it to shine freely. And in that freedom, you discover that love is never truly lost. It only changes shape, flowing from one being into the whole of existence. This realization is the heart's liberation. Grief becomes compassion, attachment becomes generosity, and love becomes boundless. When love is freed from the grip of attachment and allowed to flow as boundless metta, the heart no longer feels trapped by loss. Instead of shrinking into despair, it begins to expand, touching others with the warmth that once seemed impossible to share again. But the journey does not stop with inner expansion. There is another step where grief itself becomes a source of strength and direction. This is the alchemy of turning personal sorrow into compassionate action. Rather than allowing pain to remain stagnant, Buddhist practice teaches us to let it move, to let it shape our choices, and to let it become fuel for service and healing in the world. Grief holds immense energy. At first, this energy feels crushing, like a fire burning everything in its path. Left unchanneled, it can consume us, leaving only ashes of despair. But fire can also give warmth, light, and nourishment if directed with care. The alchemy of grief is learning to transform its raw energy into acts that relieve suffering, both in ourselves and in others. This transformation is not about suppressing pain, it is about transmuting it into a force that benefits life rather than destroys it. The process begins with recognition. When you see that your sorrow is not only yours, but part of a shared human reality, compassion naturally awakens. This recognition shifts grief from a private prison to a bridge that connects you to others. Instead of being defined only by what you have lost, you begin to see what others are losing too. Their tears mirror your own, their silence echoes your silence. In this recognition, the seed of compassionate action is planted. You are moved not only to understand their suffering, but to alleviate it in whatever ways you can. Compassionate action takes many forms. For some, it becomes direct service, offering time, skills, or presence to those who are struggling. For others, it emerges as small acts of kindness woven into daily life, listening deeply to a friend, comforting someone with your words, or simply being patient with a stranger. These acts may seem small, but when fueled by the depth of grief, they carry weight. They are not gestures of politeness. They are offerings from a heart that knows pain and refuses to let that pain harden into bitterness. Buddhist practice encourages us to see suffering not as something to be avoided, but as something that can guide us. The Buddha himself, upon seeing sickness, aging, and death, did not turn away. He allowed that recognition to shape his path. Likewise, when grief enters your life, you can let it shape your actions. Instead of asking only how to escape your sorrow, you ask how it might help you ease the sorrow of others. This question shifts grief from an end into a beginning, from a wound into a doorway. The alchemy of grief into action also dissolves the sense of helplessness that often comes with loss. When someone you love is gone, you may feel powerless, unable to change what has happened. But when you use that grief as fuel for compassion, you regain agency. You cannot reverse death, but you can choose how to respond to its impact. You can let it close your heart, or you can let it open you to the needs of others. Choosing the latter restores a sense of purpose. It reminds you that while you cannot control loss, you can shape what grows from it. This transformation also changes your relationship with memory. Instead of letting memories become anchors that drag you into endless longing, you allow them to inspire you. Perhaps your loved one valued kindness, courage, or generosity. By embodying these qualities, you extend their presence into the world. Each compassionate act becomes a way of honoring them. In this way, grief becomes not only personal sorrow, but a continuation of the love you shared. The memory lives not only in your mind, but in your actions. The path of transforming grief into compassionate action requires mindfulness. Without awareness, grief easily collapses into self-absorption. With awareness, you notice the energy of sorrow and ask how it can be directed. You pause, breathe, and choose. This mindfulness ensures that action is not driven by restlessness or guilt, but by genuine care. It grounds compassion in clarity, making it sustainable rather than draining. This transformation also builds resilience. When you act with compassion, even while grieving, you discover strength you did not know you had. You realize that pain does not need to paralyze, it can mobilize. Each act of kindness becomes a small victory against despair. Each gesture of care affirms that life continues to hold meaning, even in the presence of loss. Over time, this resilience becomes part of who you are. You no longer fear grief as a force that will destroy you, because you know you can use its energy wisely. The alchemy of grief also ripples outward. When others see someone carrying pain, yet still offering kindness, they are inspired. Your actions remind them that suffering does not need to end in bitterness. It can give rise to strength, generosity, and courage. This ripple effect spreads far beyond what you may ever witness. Compassionate action has a way of multiplying, touching lives you may never meet. In this way, your grief becomes a contribution to the healing of the wider world. Buddhist teachings often describe compassion and wisdom as two wings of a bird. Grief, when transformed, strengthens both. Compassion grows because you feel deeply the suffering of others. Wisdom grows because you see directly that suffering is universal and impermanent. Together, they allow you to rise above despair. They allow you to use grief not as an anchor, but as a wind that propels you forward into meaningful service. In practical terms, this might mean volunteering in a hospice, supporting someone through their own mourning, or simply living each day with more patience and kindness. It might mean advocating for justice, caring for the vulnerable, or protecting the natural world. The form varies, but the essence is the same. Grief becomes fuel for love in action, and in this action, your own heart finds healing. Transforming grief into compassionate action also teaches that meaning is not found in avoiding suffering, but in how we respond to it. The pain of loss will always leave its mark, but it does not need to be wasted. It can become a source of growth, of connection, of contribution. In this way, loss itself becomes part of the path to awakening. When you allow grief to become compassion, you discover that the heart is larger than you ever knew. It can hold sorrow and still give. It can ache and still act. It can break and still heal others. This is the alchemy the Buddha pointed to, the transformation of personal pain into a force that heals the world. And through this transformation, you find that your own healing is inseparable from the healing you bring to others. When grief is transformed into compassionate action, the heart discovers strength in service, and pain becomes a source of connection rather than isolation. Yet even as action heals, there is another medicine often overlooked, one that does not come from doing, but from stillness. In a world that rushes to cover sorrow with noise and distraction, silence offers something radically different. Silence is not emptiness, it is space. It is the ground where grief can breathe without being forced to perform, explain, or justify. In Buddhist practice, silence is honored as a gift because it allows emotions to be digested rather than buried, to be felt fully rather than distorted by constant noise. Silence in mourning is often uncomfortable because it leaves us face to face with what we most want to avoid. Without distractions, the ache of loss rises clearly. Yet this is precisely why silence is healing. To sit in quiet is to allow grief to surface in its raw form without dilution. Instead of layering over it with endless talking, constant activity, or background noise, silence opens the heart to feel what is truly there. This direct contact with sorrow, though painful, is necessary for transformation. Without it, grief festers unprocessed, resurfacing later in heavier forms. In Buddhism, silence is not about absence, but about presence. When the chatter of the mind slows, what remains is awareness. In this awareness, grief can be observed rather than fought. You begin to notice the rise and fall of emotions, the shifts in your body, the ebb and flow of tears. These observations, made in silence, create understanding. Instead of being swept into grief's storm, you learn to witness it. This witnessing is not cold detachment. It is compassionate attention. It allows the heart to honor its pain without drowning in it. Silence also frees us from the pressure to explain our grief to others. Often, in social settings, mourners feel compelled to put their sorrow into words to make it understandable. But grief is not always articulate. It moves in ways that language cannot fully capture. Silence gives permission to feel without translation. It respects the inexpressible nature of loss. In this respect, silence itself becomes a form of truth-telling. It acknowledges that some wounds are too deep for words. In the grieving process, silence creates space for memory to arise gently. Instead of forcing remembrance through conversation or clinging to photographs, silence allows memories to surface naturally. Some may be tender, others painful, but all are part of the tapestry of love and loss. This quiet remembering honors the person who is gone without trying to freeze them in time. It lets them live in the subtle rhythms of the heart, where words are unnecessary. Silence also reveals the body's role in mourning. When you stop filling every moment with activity, you notice how grief lives in the body, the heaviness in the chest, the fatigue in the limbs, the tension in the jaw. These signals, often ignored in constant distraction, are honored in silence. By noticing them, you can respond with care, resting, breathing, or simply allowing the body to release what it holds. This bodily awareness is a form of healing that talking alone cannot provide. Another gift of silence is its power to interrupt the cycle of rumination. Grief often fuels repetitive thoughts, replaying the last moments, questioning what could have been done differently, fearing the future without the loved one. These thoughts can become endless loops. Silence, practiced mindfully, interrupts this loop. In the stillness, you return to the simplicity of breath, to the presence of now. The mind may wander, but silence teaches you to return again and again, preventing grief from spiraling into mental suffering. In Buddhist monasteries, silence is cultivated deliberately through practices such as noble silence. This is not just the absence of speech, but a commitment to inner quiet. Monks refrain from unnecessary words to deepen awareness and to honor the sacredness of each moment. For mourners, adopting even brief periods of noble silence can bring similar clarity. It strips away distractions and reveals what lies beneath, the heart longing for peace. Silence also deepens compassion. When you sit quietly with your own grief, you begin to sense the grief of others more profoundly. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting the universality of sorrow. You realize that countless others are also sitting with their own losses, perhaps at this very moment. This recognition turns your silence into solidarity, a quiet connection with unseen companions on the path of loss. In daily life, silence can be cultivated through small practices: turning off the television, putting down the phone, sitting alone with a candle, or simply breathing without distraction. These practices may seem simple, yet they carry immense power. They create pockets of stillness where the heart can soften. Over time, these pockets expand, becoming sanctuaries of healing within the chaos of daily life. Silence also invites insight. In the quiet, thoughts settle like sediment in water, and clarity rises. You may begin to see patterns in your grief, understand emotions more deeply, or notice wisdom that was hidden beneath the noise. These insights are not forced. They emerge naturally when the mind is given space. They help you see loss not only as pain, but as teacher, offering lessons about impermanence, love, and resilience. There is also a spiritual dimension to silence. Many Buddhist traditions teach that silence brings you closer to the essence of reality, beyond concepts and words. In silence, you may touch a sense of vastness, a still ground beneath all change. This experience can be profoundly comforting in grief, reminding you that beneath the turbulence of sorrow, there is a deeper peace that has always been there. Silence in mourning is not meant to replace connection with others, but to balance it. Just as sharing grief with loved ones brings healing, so does resting in silence. Too much talking can scatter the heart. Too much isolation can harden it. Silence provides a middle ground where you can return to yourself, recharge, and then re-enter the world with more steadiness. The gift of silence in grief is that it creates space for emotions to flow, for memories to breathe, for the body to release, for the mind to rest, and for the spirit to remember its depth. Without silence, grief risks becoming endless noise inside and out. With silence, grief becomes a process of digestion, where pain is slowly transformed into understanding. In this transformation, sorrow is not erased, but it is carried with more grace, more clarity, and more peace. Silence shows us that grief cannot be digested through constant distraction, but only through stillness and honest attention. Yet, as silence deepens, another truth begins to emerge, one that reaches to the root of why loss feels so unbearable. Beneath the sorrow lies a powerful belief that there is a solid, separate me who has lost something that belonged to them. Buddhism teaches that this sense of self is an illusion. It feels real, but it is a construction of thought. When this illusion is clung to, suffering multiplies. The teaching of anatta, or non-self, invites us to look more closely, to question the story of my loss, and to see that grief shifts when the self at its center is loosened. At first, this idea may feel harsh. How can there not be a self when the pain feels so personal, so raw? Yet, when examined carefully, the sense of self reveals itself as fragile and shifting. The I who is grieving is not the same as the I who once laughed with joy, nor the I who will one day smile again. Thoughts change, emotions change, the body itself changes, and yet we call all of this me. In truth, it is a flow, a collection of conditions arising and dissolving. Grief becomes heavier because we grasp at this flow and insist it be solid. We say, "This happened to me," as if there were a fixed owner at the center. But when the self is seen as a process rather than an object, the burden of grief begins to lighten. The illusion of self magnifies suffering because it turns universal truths into personal punishments. Death happens to all beings, but when filtered through the self, it feels like my unique tragedy. Pain becomes heavier when wrapped in the belief of my loss, my grief, my broken heart. Anatta teaches that there is no permanent owner of these experiences. There is grief, but no unchanging self who owns it. There are tears, but no permanent self who claims them. There is sorrow, but it passes through ever-shifting conditions of body and mind. Seeing this does not erase pain, but it changes its weight. It becomes an event in the flow of existence, not an identity to cling to. This perspective can be freeing. When you drop the illusion of self, loss is no longer something that defines you forever. It is something that arises in consciousness, lingers, and passes. Just as waves appear and disappear in the sea, grief arises and fades in awareness. You are not the wave, you are the sea that holds it. The wave of sorrow is temporary, but the awareness that sees it is vast and unbroken. Resting in that awareness allows you to hold grief without drowning in the story of I and mine. Non-self also reshapes the way we hold relationships. We often think of others in terms of possession: my mother, my partner, my friend. When they are gone, the self feels robbed. But in truth, those beings were never possessions. They were flows of changing conditions, intersecting with your own flow for a time. Their presence was a meeting, not ownership. To see this is to let love transform from clinging into appreciation. You honor the time shared without demanding permanence. The illusion of mine falls away, leaving gratitude for the connection that was. The teaching of anatta also reveals that what we call the self is deeply interdependent. Your body is made of food, water, and air that come from beyond you. Your mind is shaped by language, culture, and experiences given by others. Even your grief is interwoven with all you have received from those who came before. When you see this interdependence, the sharpness of my loss softens. It becomes not a private wound, but part of a vast network of causes and conditions. You are grieving, but you are also participating in something larger than yourself. This perspective turns grief from isolation into connection. Another aspect of non-self is the recognition that identity itself is impermanent. The roles you once played, child, parent, partner, friend, shift constantly. When a loved one dies, part of the suffering comes from the collapse of identity. If I am no longer their son, who am I? Or, if I am no longer their partner, what remains? But anatta reminds us that identity was always shifting. You have never been one fixed thing. The loss of a role is painful, but it is not the loss of a permanent self. You remain a living, changing process. To see this allows you to adapt, to continue becoming, rather than being frozen in the story of what was lost. This teaching also protects against despair. When grief feels unbearable, it is often because the mind repeats, I cannot survive this, I am broken. But when you look closely, you see that grief is not a single solid weight. It is waves of sensations, thoughts and feelings arising moment by moment. Some moments are heavier, others lighter. There is no permanent self being crushed, only awareness of changing experiences. This realization gives space. It shows you that you do not need to carry an eternal identity of the one who lost. You simply meet each moment as it is, without the added burden of self. In Buddhist meditation, contemplating non-self can bring deep relief. When you observe the body, you see it is not yours, but a collection of processes, breath entering and leaving, cells forming and dying. When you observe the mind, you see thoughts and emotions appear without your control and fade without your permission. This observation loosens the grip of ownership. You see that grief itself arises and dissolves according to conditions. It is not something you are, but something you experience. This distinction is crucial. It shifts grief from identity to event. The illusion of self also hides in language. We say, I am grieving, or I am devastated. Yet in truth, grief is happening. Devastation is happening. These are experiences passing through awareness, not permanent states of being. By changing how you relate to language, you begin to change how you relate to loss. You see grief as movement, not identity. This subtle shift lightens suffering because it prevents you from fusing your entire existence with one experience. Non-self also deepens compassion. When you release the illusion of me and mine, you see more clearly that all beings are caught in the same processes of impermanence and loss. Their grief is no different from yours. Their suffering is not separate. This recognition dissolves the walls between self and other. Your pain becomes a doorway to shared humanity. You wish others relief, not from pity, but from understanding. Compassion grows naturally when the self is loosened, because you see that separation itself is an illusion. Another way non-self heals grief is by revealing continuity beyond individuality. If the self is not fixed, then what you loved in another does not vanish completely. Their kindness, wisdom, and energy ripple into the world through you and through others they touched. Their influence is not bound by the illusion of self. It continues in forms you may never see. This continuity reframes loss. Instead of asking, "Where did they go?" you see how they live on in the web of interdependence. The illusion of my loss dissolves into recognition of the ongoing flow of life. Practicing with anatta is not about denying pain. It is about loosening the frame that makes pain heavier. Grief still comes, but it is no longer tied to a rigid self who clings to ownership. It is felt as part of the human process, something vast and shared, something that arises and passes. This perspective does not numb the heart, it frees it. It allows you to love deeply without being destroyed when love changes form. To see that my loss is an illusion is to free grief from its harshest edge. There is loss, but no permanent loser. There is sorrow, but no eternal sufferer. There is love, but no ownership. And in that realization, the weight of grief begins to lift. What remains is tenderness, connection, and a heart open to the truth of change. This is the gift of anatta in mourning, liberation from the illusion of self, and with it, freedom from the heaviest chains of suffering. When the illusion of my loss begins to soften, grief no longer feels like a private prison with walls closing in. The recognition of non-self shows us that sorrow does not belong to a fixed identity. It is part of the ever-shifting stream of existence. Yet this truth, while liberating, is not always easy to hold in daily life. This is why Buddhist traditions have long relied on rituals, not as empty ceremonies, but as living expressions of impermanence. In monasteries across the world, practices like creating sand mandalas, offering fire pujas, or pouring water as a blessing embody in physical form the truths we struggle to grasp with thought alone. These rituals are not meant only for monks. They are gifts for all of us, reminders that release and letting go can be practiced with hands as much as with the mind. Rituals of impermanence serve as mirrors for the heart. Words may tell us that everything changes, but to watch a group of monks spend days bending over grains of sand, crafting an intricate mandala only to sweep it away in moments, makes impermanence visible. The beauty that once seemed permanent dissolves before your eyes. There is grief in the sweeping away, but also clarity. You see that the value of the mandala was never in its endurance. It was in the attention, care, and presence poured into each moment of its creation. This is the essence of life itself, fragile, fleeting, precious, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. The same wisdom is present in fire rituals. When monks gather to offer prayers, herbs, or symbolic items into a blazing flame, they enact release in its most vivid form. What is placed in the fire disappears, transformed into smoke and ash, carried into the vastness of the sky. This act is not destruction, but offering. It reminds the grieving heart that letting go is not erasure, but transformation. The person you love, the moments you cherish, do not vanish into nothingness. They change form, just as wood becomes flame, flame becomes smoke, and smoke becomes air. Watching the fire consume offerings teaches the body what the mind resists, that release can be holy. These rituals also teach the importance of embodiment. Too often, grief lives only in the head, cycling through memories and regrets. Ritual draws it into the body, giving it gesture, movement, and form. Sweeping sand, chanting verses, pouring water, each act anchors loss in something tangible, something that can be enacted and released. The body learns to let go through practice, and the heart slowly follows. This is why rituals across cultures, not only in Buddhism, are so powerful in mourning. They give sorrow a place to move rather than letting it stagnate inside. In monasteries, impermanence is also practiced through daily rhythms. Bells ring, meals are offered, robes are folded, and each act is done with the knowledge that nothing is fixed. Even these small acts are rituals of letting go, of attachment to comfort, to routine, to permanence. For the grieving, learning to bring ritual into daily life can be deeply healing. Lighting a candle each night, bowing silently in the morning, or writing a prayer and burning it, these small practices echo the great monastic rituals. They bring the wisdom of impermanence into the intimacy of your own home. Rituals also remind us that impermanence does not need to be feared. The sweeping of a mandala is accompanied not by despair, but by chanting, by reverence, by joy in release. Fire pujas are marked by offerings and blessings, not only by flames. Through ritual, impermanence becomes something to honor rather than dread. It shows us that letting go can be sacred, that endings can be ceremonies of beauty rather than only wounds. Grief often feels chaotic, but rituals create structure. They give the heart something steady to lean on when everything else feels unstable. In monasteries, the repetition of ritual, day after day, season after season, becomes a rhythm that carries the monks through both joy and sorrow. For those grieving, ritual can provide similar grounding. By returning to a simple practice each day, you give grief a container. You do not banish it, but you give it a form that keeps it from overwhelming you. Rituals of impermanence also bridge the personal and the universal. A single mandala is swept away, but the act reflects the sweeping away of all forms in life. A single fire consumes offerings, but it mirrors the fire of time that consumes all. By participating in these rituals, you connect your personal grief to the larger rhythm of existence. Your sorrow becomes less isolating when you see it reflected in the universal truth enacted before your eyes. There is also beauty in the communal aspect of these rituals. In monasteries, They are rarely done alone. Monks gather, chant, and move together. This shared practice transforms impermanence from a solitary burden into a collective truth. For the grieving, joining in ritual with others can ease the loneliness of loss. Whether it is a group prayer, a shared silence, or a simple meal offered in memory, ritual practice together reminds you that you are not the only one walking through change. In the presence of ritual, grief becomes less of a private ache and more of a sacred passage. It teaches you that loss is not a mistake, but a natural rhythm to be honored. Rituals of impermanence give you a way to embody letting go, to practice it with hands and breath until the heart can join. They are not meant to erase pain, but to guide it, to shape it, to transform it into reverence. Through these traditions, the wisdom of impermanence moves from concept into lived truth. And once you have touched that truth in ritual, you can begin to carry it into every moment of your life. Rituals of impermanence in monasteries show us that grief can be given form, honored, and then released. They remind us that even endings can be sacred if we learn to engage them with presence and reverence. Yet beyond ritual lies another dimension of practice, the recognition that grief itself can be a path of training. Instead of seeing loss only as something to endure, Buddhism invites us to treat it as a demanding but profound teacher. Grief, in all its rawness, becomes a discipline, shaping patience, strengthening equanimity, and deepening compassion in ways that comfort alone never could. Loss challenges the mind in ways few other experiences can. It strips away illusions of control, confronts us with impermanence, and forces us to sit with emotions that cannot be neatly resolved. In this way, grief functions like an advanced meditation retreat, where the lessons are relentless and unavoidable. Each wave of sorrow becomes an opportunity to train the mind not in avoidance, but in resilience. By facing grief with awareness, patience naturally grows. You learn that emotions cannot be rushed. You wait as waves rise and fall, trusting that the heart can endure. This waiting, though painful, develops a strength of patience far deeper than ordinary inconveniences ever could. Equanimity, the ability to remain steady amid change, is another fruit of this training. In grief, emotions swing violently, some days numb, others piercing, sometimes both in the same hour. To meet these shifts without clinging to the highs or collapsing under the lows is the essence of equanimity. It is not coldness, but steadiness. By practicing presence in grief, you gradually learn that you can feel deeply without being destroyed, that you can witness extremes without being thrown endlessly between them. This balance is not achieved through denial, but through repeated practice of returning to the center, no matter how fierce the storm. Compassion grows naturally through this training because grief opens the heart to the suffering of others. Before loss, it is easy to stay wrapped in personal concerns. After loss, the sharpness of your own pain reveals how tender life truly is for everyone. Each person you meet carries invisible sorrows. Grief trains you to notice, to soften, to respond with gentleness rather than judgment. Compassion born of grief is not abstract, it is embodied. You know in your bones what sorrow feels like, and that knowledge transforms how you meet others. This training is not easy. It demands surrender, humility, and willingness to be reshaped by something you did not choose. Yet, it is precisely this difficulty that makes it powerful. The Buddha often described suffering as the ground from which wisdom grows. Grief is one of the most concentrated forms of suffering we encounter, and thus one of the most fertile grounds for wisdom if we let it teach us. Each tear becomes a lesson in impermanence, each ache a reminder of love, each wave of longing a chance to deepen presence. Grief also trains the mind in letting go of expectation. Before loss, we often carry unconscious assumptions that life will unfold in certain ways, that loved ones will be there tomorrow, that the ground beneath us is secure. Loss shatters these assumptions. The mind resists, searching for stability where none exists. But through grief, the mind slowly learns a new stability, not in external conditions, but in inner acceptance. This shift is profound. It reorients you from trying to control life to learning to meet it as it is. This training also strengthens honesty. Grief does not allow pretense for long. It strips away masks and reveals what is raw and real. To sit with grief is to sit with truth, however uncomfortable. Over time, this develops the courage to be honest with yourself and with others. You learn not to cover pain with false smiles, not to avoid hard conversations, not to live superficially. Grief trains you to value authenticity, because you know firsthand how fragile time is and how precious honesty can be. In Buddhist terms, grief can also be seen as a practice in non-attachment. The heart longs to hold what is gone, yet reality refuses. Each moment of clinging deepens pain, and each moment of release brings relief. By moving through this cycle again and again, the mind learns viscerally what teachings often say in words. Attachment leads to suffering. Release leads to peace. This is not learned intellectually, but in the body, in the chest that aches when clinging and softens when letting go. Grief teaches non-attachment in the most intimate way possible. Patience, equanimity, compassion, honesty, and non-attachment. These are not small qualities. They are the foundations of wisdom. And grief, though unwanted, provides one of the most direct paths to them. This reframing changes how we hold sorrow. Instead of treating it only as a wound, we treat it as a teacher. Instead of asking only how to get rid of it, we ask what it has to teach. This shift does not make grief easy, but it gives it meaning. It turns pain into practice. Grief as mind training also shows us the depth of our resilience. Each day you wake up and continue breathing, even when the heart feels heavy, is a form of training. Each time you allow yourself to cry without collapsing, you strengthen endurance. Each time you offer kindness, even while hurting, you prove the capacity of the heart to hold both sorrow and love. These small victories accumulate, shaping a mind that is more stable, more open, more alive. In the end, grief is not something we master, but something that reshapes us. Its lessons are carved slowly, often painfully, but with each carving, the heart becomes larger. The patience it builds allows you to endure life's changes. The equanimity it teaches keeps you steady amid storms. The compassion it awakens connects you to others more deeply than ever before. And in this way, grief, though bitter, becomes a form of training, refining the mind, shaping the heart, and leading you closer to wisdom. When grief is understood as mind training, it becomes more than a wound to endure. It becomes a demanding teacher, shaping patience, equanimity, and compassion. But even with this reframing, one question often lingers in the heart. What happens to those we lose? Is their story truly over, or does it continue in ways we cannot yet see? Buddhism offers an answer that dissolves the sharp edge of finality. The teaching of rebirth and continuity suggests that nothing ends absolutely. Just as energy is never destroyed but only changes form, so too does the flow of life. What appears as an ending is part of a larger movement, a transformation that carries existence beyond the visible. Rebirth in Buddhism is not about a fixed soul traveling intact from one body to another. It is about continuity, like a flame passed from one candle to the next. The flame looks new, yet it is connected to the one before. In the same way, the life you loved does not vanish into nothingness. Its energy continues in new expressions, shaped by the conditions and actions that came before. This understanding softens the cruelty of absolute endings. It reveals that death is not a wall, but a doorway. Continuity is also visible in the present world, not only in metaphysical teachings. The words, deeds, and influence of those who die ripple outward in countless ways. The kindness they showed becomes part of how others act. The lessons they taught live in the decisions of those who carry them forward. Even their flaws and struggles shape the paths of those who learn from them. Nothing disappears entirely. Every life leaves traces, woven into the fabric of existence. Recognizing this continuity allows grief to expand from despair into reverence. The one you miss has not been erased. They are still moving through the world in unseen ways. Buddhist reflection on rebirth also loosens fear. When death is seen as total extinction, the mind resists with terror. But when death is seen as transition, the fear lessens. Just as night follows day without destroying the cycle, so too does death follow life without ending the flow. This perspective brings courage, not only for your own mortality, but for the losses you face. You realize that endings are relative, not absolute. The visible form may vanish, but the essence of existence continues. Rebirth also reframes grief as part of a larger journey. If life is a series of continuities, then loss is not the end of a relationship, but a change in its form. The person you love may no longer be physically present, but their continuity lives through you, through others, and through the ongoing flow of existence. This recognition helps the heart let go of clinging without letting go of love. Love becomes wider, less bound to one form, more aligned with the truth of change. This teaching also cultivates humility. Rebirth reminds us that existence is vast and beyond full comprehension. We see only a fragment of the larger rhythm. This humility shifts the way we hold grief. Instead of demanding answers or insisting on permanence, we bow to the mystery. We accept that what seems like an end to us may be part of a greater unfolding beyond our view. This acceptance does not erase sorrow, but it brings peace to the mind that longs for certainty. The idea of continuity also strengthens ethical awareness. In Buddhism, actions shape what comes next. Every choice, every word, every thought becomes a seed that influences the flow of life beyond this visible moment. Recognizing this makes each moment precious. It reminds us that the way we live now is not only for ourselves, but part of what we pass on. In grief, this perspective gives purpose. By living with kindness and wisdom, We honor those who came before and contribute to the ongoing continuity of life. Rebirth also deepens compassion. If every being is caught in this cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, then every being knows loss, suffering, and change. This recognition widens the heart beyond personal grief. It awakens a sense of kinship with all who struggle. You realize that your sorrow connects you to the universal condition of beings moving through endless cycles. This connection makes compassion more natural because you see that suffering is not unique, but shared. In meditation, reflecting on rebirth can shift the way we relate to attachment. The mind clings because it fears endings. But when you realize that endings are never absolute, the grip begins to loosen. You love without the same desperation. You grieve without the same hopelessness. You hold life gently, knowing it is part of a continuum. This gentle holding transforms both love and loss into sources of wisdom. The teaching of continuity also brings comfort when remembering those who have passed. Instead of picturing them as erased from existence, you can reflect on the ways their energy continues, perhaps in the kindness you now extend, in the choices you make, in the ripple of lives they touched. This shifts memory from despair to gratitude. Each recollection becomes not a reminder of absence, but a recognition of ongoing presence in different forms. Rebirth is also a reminder of impermanence within impermanence. Just as lives begin and end, so too does grief itself. The sorrow you feel now will not remain fixed. It will change, soften, transform, just as everything does. Seeing this continuity of change brings patience. You do not demand instant healing. You trust the rhythm of transformation. In this trust, you find steadiness. Ultimately, the Buddhist view of rebirth and continuity dissolves the harshness of finality. Death no longer appears as an absolute cut, but as part of the turning of existence. Loss becomes not a void, but a transition, not the end of love, but its transformation. To see this is to grieve without despair, to mourn with wisdom, and to find peace in the rhythm that carries all beings forward. When we reflect on rebirth and continuity, the heart softens toward the truth that nothing ends absolutely. The person we love does not vanish into a void, but continues in ways both visible and hidden, woven into the ongoing rhythm of existence. Yet even with this understanding, grief can still feel heavy, and the human heart longs not only for philosophy, but for comfort, for a sense of presence that can hold us when sorrow feels unbearable. This is where the bodhisattvas enter the path of mourning. In Mahayana Buddhism, the bodhisattvas are beings who embody compassion and wisdom so vast that they vow to remain with all living beings until every last one is free from suffering. Among them, Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, is invoked as a source of solace, strength, and unshakable care. To call on Avalokiteshvara in times of grief is not about escaping reality, but about feeling supported within it. The heart imagines a presence so compassionate that it hears the cries of the world, and in that imagination, or rather in that deep inner resonance, something shifts. Grief no longer feels like a solitary burden carried alone. Instead, it feels witnessed, held, and softened by the boundless compassion of one who has dedicated their existence to easing sorrow. For countless practitioners, chanting the name of Avalokiteshvara or visualizing the Bodhisattva's form becomes an anchor in mourning. The sound of the sacred syllables, the vision of infinite compassion, remind the grieving heart that even in pain, one is not abandoned. The role of the Bodhisattva in loss is also symbolic of what awakens within us. Avalokiteshvara does not stand apart, handing out comfort from some unreachable place. The Bodhisattva of compassion represents the seed of compassion already present within every heart. When you call upon Avalokiteshvara, you are also calling forth your own capacity to be gentle, patient, and kind with yourself. This is why the practice brings solace. It is not only an external prayer, but an inner awakening. The very act of invoking compassion invites compassion to rise in you, to hold your grief without judgment, to let tears flow without shame, and to remind you that tenderness is strength. Bodhisattvas also reframe the meaning of grief. Instead of being a weight that isolates you, grief becomes an opportunity to join in the vow of compassion. When you see your suffering mirrored in Avalokiteshvara's great vow to hear the cries of all beings, you realize that your pain is not meaningless. It is part of the larger tapestry of suffering that the Bodhisattvas dedicate themselves to healing. This recognition turns grief into connection, into solidarity with all who mourn, into a reminder that your sorrow places you within the embrace of universal compassion. Invoking Avalokiteshvara also works through ritual and imagery. Visualizations often depict the Bodhisattva with 1,000 arms, each hand holding an eye, ready to reach in all directions to relieve suffering. For someone grieving, this image is deeply powerful. It says, no matter how many beings cry out, compassion has the capacity to hear and respond. Your grief is not too small to be noticed, nor too vast to be held. The image itself becomes medicine, planting in the mind the assurance that compassion is limitless and always available. The Bodhisattva's role also includes giving courage. In grief, fear often arises. The fear of facing the future alone, the fear of forgetting, the fear of losing oneself in sorrow. To contemplate Avalokiteshvara is to remember that compassion carries courage within it. Gentle as it feels, compassion is not fragile, it is resilient. It does not turn away from suffering, but walks directly into it. When you connect with that energy, you borrow its strength. You realize you too can face sorrow with courage, not by denying it, but by walking through it with the steady support of compassion. The practice of invoking a bodhisattva also breaks through the loneliness of grief. Even when surrounded by people, loss can feel isolating. The presence of Avalokiteshvara counters this isolation with the sense of being accompanied. Whether through chanting Om Mani Padme Hum or sitting in silent meditation with the Bodhisattva's image in mind, practitioners often feel a quiet companionship. This companionship is not about physical presence, but about resonance. Knowing that compassion itself is with you, that you are not unseen, not forgotten, not abandoned. Importantly, the Bodhisattva's comfort does not replace the work of grief. It supports it. Avalokiteshvara does not remove sorrow, but helps you hold it with gentleness. This distinction matters. Grief is not something to be erased, but something to be carried wisely. The Bodhisattva of compassion provides a way to carry it without collapse, to soften the sharp edges, to find dignity in mourning. This is why Buddhist practice does not say, forget, but says, be held, be supported, and in being supported, allow love to expand. In this way, Avalokiteshvara is not only a figure of devotion, but also a mirror of possibility. The comfort felt from invoking this bodhisattva points us back to our own potential for boundless compassion. The more we call upon Avalokiteshvara, the more we recognize that the same qualities exist within us. Slowly, grief teaches us not only to seek compassion, but to become it, for ourselves and for others. This is the deeper role of the bodhisattva in mourning, to awaken the bodhisattva in each of us. Thus, the solace Avalokiteshvara offers is both external and internal, both symbolic and practical. For those grieving, the bodhisattva of compassion provides an image, a mantra, a presence, a reminder that sorrow can be held by something larger than oneself. And through this connection, the grieving heart finds not only comfort, but also the strength to keep walking, to keep loving, to keep serving. This is the gift of the bodhisattvas. They remind us that compassion is endless, and that in the face of loss, we are never truly alone. When we turn to the bodhisattvas for comfort, especially Avalokiteshvara, we discover that compassion itself is vast enough to hold grief. The heart feels less alone, and sorrow becomes part of a universal embrace. Yet compassion, as powerful as it is, also points us toward another truth. Suffering deepens when we resist the natural currents of life. Holding tightly, fighting what is already moving, or demanding permanence in a world of change only creates more pain. Here the wisdom of Taoist-influenced Buddhist thought offers a different path, Wu Wei, the way of non-resistance, of letting the river flow. In grief, this teaching becomes not an escape, but an invitation to stop struggling against what cannot be stopped, to rest in the naturalness of loss, and to discover peace in the very act of allowing. Wu Wei does not mean passivity. It is not giving up or sinking into despair. It is a practice of alignment, moving with life's current instead of against it. Loss comes, as birth comes, as change comes, and no amount of resistance can alter this rhythm. The mind wants to build dams, to hold back the river, to freeze what is flowing. This effort exhausts the heart. But when you release resistance, when you allow the river to move as it will, grief begins to soften. The ache remains, but it is carried by the current rather than clenched in the fist. Non-resistance allows sorrow to be what it is without labeling it wrong. The pain of loss is real, but much of the suffering comes from telling ourselves it should not be. We say, this should not have happened. This should not be my life. These thoughts fight reality. Wu Wei teaches another way, to acknowledge what has already unfolded and to stop adding the struggle of resistance. This acceptance is not coldness, it is honesty. It gives the heart permission to weep, but without the added torment of demanding that life be other than it is. Letting the river flow also reveals the wisdom of impermanence. Just as a river is never the same from one moment to the next, grief too changes, sometimes sharp, sometimes quiet, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes distant. It is never fixed. When you resist, you freeze it in your mind, clinging to the belief that this pain is forever. When you flow with it, you begin to see its shifting nature. This recognition brings patience. You trust that no feeling, however strong, will stay the same forever. Wu Wei also invites trust in the larger order of life. The river does not need you to direct it, it knows where to go. In the same way, loss and change move through existence as part of a rhythm far bigger than any one person's control. When you allow yourself to rest in this trust, even briefly, a burden lifts. You no longer carry the impossible responsibility of fixing what cannot be fixed. You learn to bow to the current, to recognize that you are part of a vast flow that has carried countless beings before you and will continue long after. This practice softens guilt as well. Many mourners carry the weight of believing they should have done more, should have prevented what happened, should have altered the course. Wu Wei dissolves this illusion. Just as no one controls the river's course, no one controls the full unfolding of life and death. You play your part, but the current is larger than you. To see this is to release yourself from blame and to find peace in surrender. Wu Wei also shifts how you hold memories. Instead of clutching at them as if they could anchor you in the past, you let them flow through you like the river's ripples. Each memory comes, touches the heart, and then moves on. This practice prevents memories from becoming prisons. They remain tender, sometimes painful, sometimes sweet, but they are allowed to move, to breathe, to transform. Non-resistance also teaches how to hold emotions. When grief rises, the instinct is often to push it away or to drown in it. Wu Wei offers a middle path. Let it pass through. If anger comes, let it come, knowing it will go. If sorrow comes, let it come, knowing it will go. If even moments of joy return, let them come without guilt, knowing they too will go. By flowing with emotions instead of resisting them, you find balance. The river carries all waters, calm and turbulent alike, and still continues its path. In daily life, this teaching can be practiced in simple ways. When grief tightens in your chest, breathe with it instead of fighting it. When memories return, allow them to touch you without demanding they stay. When tears rise, let them fall without judgment. Each of these small acts is Wu Wei in practice, an act of letting the river carry what you cannot hold forever. This approach also nurtures humility. Resistance often comes from the illusion of control, from believing life should bend to our will. Wu Wei humbles us by reminding us that life flows according to its own nature. This humility is not defeat, but liberation. It frees you from the exhausting struggle of trying to master what is unmasterable. It allows you to live with more ease, more patience, and more grace. Ultimately, letting the river flow turns grief from an enemy into a companion. You stop fighting it as a curse and start walking with it as part of the journey. The pain remains, but it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like part of the current that carries all beings forward. By surrendering to this flow, you discover a peace that resistance could never give. In this way, Wu Wei becomes more than philosophy. It becomes a practice of healing. To let the river flow is to allow life to be what it is, to stop exhausting yourself in battle with reality, and to find freedom in surrender. This does not erase grief, but it transforms how you carry it. You are no longer dragged under by the current. You are floating within it, held by the naturalness of loss, moving gently toward peace. Letting the river flow through Wu Wei teaches the heart the freedom of surrender, showing that loss becomes less suffocating when we no longer fight the natural currents of life. Yet there is a truth even subtler than non-resistance, a wisdom that does not only accept the flow, but rests completely in the nature of things as they are. In Buddhism, this is called tathata, suchness. To experience suchness is to encounter reality directly, without distortion, without clinging, without resistance. When grief arrives, the mind often overlays it with endless stories. This should not have happened. My life is ruined. I cannot survive this. These stories amplify pain. The wisdom of suchness cuts through them. It invites us to see loss simply as it is, raw and unadorned, without adding what does not belong. Suchness does not deny emotion. It allows sorrow, longing, and love to be felt fully. But it strips away the unnecessary suffering born from fighting reality. To say, "My loved one should not have died," is to resist what is already true. Suchness replaces this resistance with direct seeing. They have died, and I feel sorrow. This simple, honest acknowledgement is powerful. It transforms grief from a tangled web of resistance into a clear experience. The pain remains, but the extra weight of denial and protest is removed. Living in suchness also brings clarity to the heart. Endings are often clouded by confusion, by the mind's desperate attempt to rewrite the past or control the future. When you rest in suchness, you meet only what is present. The stillness of this meeting reveals a spaciousness within grief. The sorrow is there, but so is the breath, so is the moment, so is life continuing. You realize that even within loss, reality is not only pain, it is a vast tapestry of presence. This way of seeing also awakens humility. Suchness shows us that life is not obligated to match our desires. It is as it is. The heart may want permanence, but reality offers impermanence. The mind may want answers, but reality often offers mystery. To rest in suchness is to bow to this truth, to stop demanding that life conform to what we wish. This bow is not defeat, but freedom. It frees you from the exhausting struggle to reshape what cannot be reshaped. Suchness also dissolves illusion. Much of suffering comes from clinging to ideas about how things should be. Ideas about yourself, about others, about life. In loss, these illusions are shattered. But instead of despairing, suchness teaches us to see clearly. It says, "The person you loved was never permanent. They were always changing, always fragile, always passing through, as are you." This seeing may sting, but it also liberates. It reminds you that love was precious precisely because it was never guaranteed. The practice of experiencing suchness also strengthens presence. To meet reality as it is requires being here, now, not lost in stories of past or future. Grief often pulls the mind away, into regret, into fear, into longing. Suchness returns you to this breath, this step, this tear. In this presence, the heart discovers it can endure. You do not need to solve the whole of grief. You only need to meet this moment as it is. This is the medicine of suchness. One step, one breath, one truth at a time. There is also tenderness in suchness. To meet reality without adornment is to meet it with honesty, and honesty softens the heart. You stop pretending to be stronger than you are, You stop hiding behind distractions, and you allow yourself to feel. This vulnerability is not weakness, it is the ground of compassion. By resting in what is, without denial, you open yourself to the truth of shared humanity. You realize that every being faces endings, and in that realization, your grief becomes less isolating and more connective. Suchness also transforms how you hold memory. Instead of replaying the past with regret or clinging, you see memories simply as they arise, fleeting, tender, part of the flow. They come, you honor them, and you let them pass. This way of holding memory prevents it from becoming a prison. It allows you to treasure what was without being trapped in longing for what cannot return. This wisdom also teaches balance. Without suchness, grief tips into extremes, numbness on one side, overwhelm on the other. Suchness steadies the heart. It says, "Here is what is, no more, no less." You do not need to numb yourself. You do not need to drown. You need only meet this truth directly, and in that direct meeting, balance arises. Practicing suchness in mourning can be simple. When sorrow rises, pause and notice what is truly here. A heaviness in the chest, a thought of longing, a tear, nothing more. When regret appears, ask, is this real now, or is it a story I am adding? When fear of the future comes, ask, is that happening now, or is it an imagined projection? Returning to suchness clears the mind of unnecessary suffering. It grounds you in reality where healing begins. The wisdom of Tathata does not make grief vanish. It removes the layers that make grief unbearable. It reveals that beneath the noise of resistance there is a simple truth. Loss has occurred, and the heart aches. By meeting this truth without distortion, the heart finds dignity, honesty, and eventually, peace. Suchness is not an escape from sorrow, but a deeper entering into it, one that transforms suffering by removing everything that is not necessary. In this way, Tathata becomes a path of freedom. Endings remain painful, but they no longer feel like betrayal. They are seen as part of reality, part of the fabric of life. And by resting in reality as it is, the heart learns to carry grief without being broken by it. This is the gift of suchness, the quiet wisdom of meeting life exactly as it is, and finding within that meeting a peace that no illusion could ever provide. Suchness shows us that suffering grows heavier when we resist reality, and lighter when we allow ourselves to meet it just as it is. In that honesty, loss no longer feels like punishment, but part of the fabric of life itself. Yet there is another dimension of healing, one that feels almost paradoxical when the heart is heavy. Alongside grief, there can also be joy, not the shallow kind that denies sorrow, but a deeper joy that arises from gratitude, memory, and the recognition of beauty even within endings. In Buddhism, this quality is called mudita, sympathetic joy, and it has the power to sit side by side with sadness. It allows you not only to mourn what is gone, but to celebrate what was given, to find light even in the shadow of loss. This joy is not forced happiness. It is not telling yourself to cheer up or pretending everything is fine. It is a quiet recognition of goodness, even when the heart aches. For example, when you recall a moment with someone who has passed, sorrow may rise because that moment will not return. But joy can also rise because it happened at all. Mudita rests in that space. A smile through tears, a warmth in the chest, even as it aches. This coexistence does not diminish grief, it balances it. When practiced in mourning, sympathetic joy reframes memory. Instead of being trapped in longing for what is gone, you shift toward appreciation for what was shared. You remember the laughter, the lessons, the simple moments, and you feel glad they occurred. This gladness does not erase sorrow, but softens its sharp edges. It reminds you that loss exists only because there was once connection, and connection itself is a gift worth celebrating. Joy also provides strength. Grief alone can drain energy, making the world feel heavy and gray. But when you allow moments of joy to return, even small ones, you regain vitality. Perhaps it is the joy of a bird singing outside, the joy of remembering a kind word, the joy of realizing you are capable of love. These sparks, when noticed and nurtured, act as counterweights. They do not remove sorrow, but prevent it from collapsing the heart entirely. This practice also honors the person you lost. To live only in lament can sometimes overshadow the beauty of their life. Mudita allows you to celebrate their qualities, their impact, their uniqueness. It lets you feel proud of their existence, joyful for the ways they touch the world. This kind of remembrance turns grief from a story of only endings into a story of both endings and gifts. It becomes a way of saying, I am sorrowful that you are gone, and I am joyful that you lived. Sympathetic joy also heals comparison. In grief, it is easy to look at others and feel bitterness. Others still have what you lost. Others are not suffering as you are. This comparison deepens pain. Mudita shifts perspective. It teaches you to rejoice in the happiness of others, even while grieving. If someone else still has their parent, their partner, their child, you can feel glad for them without letting envy consume you. This is not easy, but with practice, it widens the heart. It transforms isolation into connection, bitterness into generosity. Practicing joy alongside grief also cultivates resilience. When you train yourself to notice even the smallest joys, you build the capacity to endure sorrow without being overwhelmed. Joy becomes like a lamp carried in a dark valley. The valley is still there, but you are not walking in complete darkness. This lamp steadies your steps and reminds you that even in sorrow, beauty and goodness have not vanished from the world. Mudita also invites a reorientation toward the present. Grief often pulls you backward into the past or forward into fear of the future. Joy anchors you in what is here now. The taste of food, the sound of laughter, the comfort of a friend's presence. These small joys bring you into the moment, and in that moment, you discover that life continues to offer gifts, even as it takes away. This practice also deepens gratitude. Joy and gratitude are intertwined. When you celebrate the happiness of what was, you naturally feel thankful. Gratitude shifts the focus from absence to presence, from what is gone to what was received. This shift does not erase longing, but it balances it with appreciation. In this balance, grief becomes less about emptiness and more about fullness, the fullness of what was experienced, the richness of what was shared. Sympathetic joy can be cultivated deliberately. In meditation, you can recall someone you loved and consciously reflect on the joy they brought. You can let yourself feel gladness that such a person existed in your life, even if only for a time. You can extend this reflection outward, rejoicing in the happiness of others, allowing their joys to lift your heart. Over time, this practice trains the mind to see joy alongside sorrow, to widen its lens beyond only loss. This way of holding grief is not about moving on or leaving sorrow behind. It is about learning that the heart is vast enough to hold both grief and joy together, to weep and to smile, to ache and to celebrate, to mourn and to give thanks, all at once. This is the wisdom of mudita. Grief need not erase joy, and joy need not deny grief. They coexist, balancing one another, making life whole even in the face of endings. In this way, joy becomes a companion in mourning. It does not replace sorrow, but walks alongside it, lightening its weight, softening its edges, and reminding you that love, connection, and beauty still shine, even through loss. When we discover the balance of grief and joy, the heart begins to expand beyond its narrow focus on absence. Sorrow no longer erases beauty, and beauty no longer denies sorrow. This balance opens a doorway to something even deeper, the recognition that loss itself can be a powerful path to awakening. Throughout Buddhist history, some of the greatest transformations have come not in times of ease, but in moments of devastating loss. What seemed unbearable became the very ground for enlightenment. The fire of grief burned away illusions, leaving behind clarity, courage, and wisdom that could not have been reached otherwise. Loss strips life of its comforts and securities. It removes the illusions of permanence, of control, of identity built on fragile foundations. For most, this stripping feels like cruelty, yet for those who allow it to teach, it becomes revelation. In the emptiness left behind, a new space opens, space where truth can be seen without disguise. Many Buddhist masters have walked this path, turning personal devastation into the spark of awakening. Their stories remind us that loss is not only a wound, but also a gate, and if we have the courage to walk through it, it leads to freedom. The Buddha himself began his journey after encountering loss. Sheltered in a palace, he believed life could be insulated from suffering. But when he saw sickness, aging, and death, the illusion shattered. The grief of recognizing universal loss propelled him to leave comfort behind and search for truth. Without that confrontation, there would have been no awakening. His story is the first reminder that loss is not the end of the path, but often its beginning. Later, masters also found awakening through loss. Some lost families to war or famine, others lost health, others lost status or security. In each case, what had been taken revealed something greater. Stripped of attachments, they discovered what cannot be taken. Freed from illusions, they saw what remains when everything else falls away. These stories are not about denying pain. They are about letting pain do its work, burning through the false so the real can be revealed. For practitioners today, this teaching is both challenging and comforting. It challenges us to see grief not only as something to survive, but as a teacher we cannot find elsewhere. It comforts us by reminding us that our deepest pain is not meaningless. It can be the very path to wisdom if we are willing to walk with it. Loss, though harsh, is also sacred. It is the gate through which many before us have stepped into awakening. Loss as a gate to awakening shows us that grief can tear open illusions and reveal truths about impermanence, attachment, and the fragile nature of life. Yet even with these insights, the human heart drifts easily into forgetfulness. We return to distraction, cling again to comfort, and quietly hope that death, aging, and illness will keep their distance. This is why the Buddha gave the 5 remembrances, not as philosophy to be studied once and set aside, but as daily anchors to hold us steady in the reality of existence. These reflections are not abstract warnings, they are medicine. They prepare us for the inevitability of loss, not so that we live in fear, but so that we live awake. The first remembrance tells us that aging cannot be avoided. No matter how strong, healthy, or youthful we may feel now, the body is changing with each passing moment. This truth can feel cruel when we cling to beauty or strength, as if they will last forever. Yet to remember aging each day is to appreciate what the body gives us right now. Instead of lamenting wrinkles or fatigue, we bow to the gift of being alive, of having a body that allows us to breathe, to walk, to love. Awareness of aging removes the illusion of endless time and teaches us tenderness toward ourselves and others. When we see age in a loved one, we no longer see it as loss, but as a reminder of their precious presence in this fleeting moment. The second remembrance brings us face to face with illness. No matter how carefully we eat, how much we exercise, how many precautions we take, illness remains part of the human condition. The body is vulnerable. It cannot be made invincible. This is not meant to make us despair, but to shift our relationship to health. When health is present, we treasure it fully. When illness comes, we meet it with less shock and more compassion. Reflecting on illness daily builds resilience. It reminds us that fragility is part of being alive, and that each moment of wellness is a moment to savor, not a guarantee to assume. The third remembrance is death itself. No matter how much we resist, death will come. Its time is unknown, but its certainty is absolute. For many, this thought creates dread, but the Buddha taught it as a source of clarity. When we remember death, we stop postponing life. We stop saying someday and start saying now. We forgive sooner, we speak truth sooner, we love more openly because we know tomorrow is never promised. The remembrance of death sharpens awareness and deepens courage. Instead of making us hopeless, it gives urgency to live with meaning, to align with what truly matters. The fourth remembrance confronts us with separation. Everything we love, everyone we cherish, every possession we value will one day be lost. This truth can break the heart, yet it also opens it. By remembering separation, we treasure the people in our lives while they are still here. We stop taking relationships for granted. We speak kindness instead of holding grudges. We hold others gently, knowing they are temporary travelers in our story, just as we are in theirs. The remembrance of separation also softens the sting of loss when it comes, because we have already practiced accepting that nothing and no one can be held forever. The fifth remembrance is the truth of karma, that our actions are the only thing we truly carry. Status, possessions, even relationships cannot accompany us at death. What remains are the seeds we planted, our words, deeds, and intentions. This reflection shifts our priorities. Instead of chasing what will fade, we invest in what endures. Each act of kindness, each choice rooted in compassion, each moment of mindfulness becomes part of the legacy we leave behind. When we remember this daily, we live more carefully, not out of fear, but out of a desire to create goodness that continues beyond us. Together, these 5 reflections form a complete practice. They remove the shock of loss by making loss familiar. They replace denial with readiness, fear with clarity, and forgetfulness with wisdom. To live with these anchors is to walk with reality instead of resisting it. It is to normalize what is often treated as taboo, aging, illness, death, separation, and to prepare the heart to meet them with steadiness. By holding the 5 remembrances daily, life becomes more vivid. You love more deeply because you know love is fragile. You forgive more quickly because you know time is short. You live more intentionally because you know actions endure. And when grief arrives, as it always will, you are not unprepared. You can say, yes, this too is part of life. I have practiced for this. The sorrow remains, but it no longer feels like a cruel anomaly. It feels like the continuation of truths you have already embraced. This is the power of the 5 remembrances. They are not meant to frighten, but to awaken. They steady us in the face of inevitable loss and remind us that the way to live fully is not to deny death, but to carry its truth gently in our hearts every day. In this way, when endings come, they do not only bring grief, they also bring clarity, courage, and peace. The 5 remembrances steady us by teaching that aging, illness, death, separation, and karma are not intrusions, but the natural order of existence. By holding them daily, we learn to face loss with less shock and more clarity. Yet even with this preparation, grief can still feel unbearable when it arrives. Knowing that suffering is universal does not erase the weight of carrying it. This is why the Buddha also emphasized the power of community, the Sangha. For while the path requires individual practice, healing is not meant to be walked in isolation. Sorrow softens and transforms when it is shared, when it is witnessed by others who also carry the truths of impermanence. Sangha is more than a gathering of practitioners. It is a living field of support where grief can be surrendered. In the presence of others committed to compassion and wisdom, the heart finds space to breathe again. Alone, loss can echo endlessly inside the mind, amplifying pain. Within the Sangha, the same grief is held by many hearts, its weight distributed, its sharpness softened by collective presence. In this shared holding, sorrow is not erased, but transformed into connection, into the recognition that no one suffers alone. When you bring grief into the Sangha, you step into a circle where silence, listening, and compassion replace judgment or pressure to heal quickly. You are allowed to be broken without explanation. The tears are not asked to stop. The silence is not demanded to be filled. Instead, others simply remain with you, their presence reminding you that your pain is not too much, not unworthy, not forgotten. In this way, the Sangha becomes not only a support system, but a mirror of the universal truth. Suffering is shared, and so is healing. This collective presence also awakens strength. Alone, grief can convince you that you are powerless, that you cannot endure. But in community, you witness others who have faced their own losses and continued walking the path. Their resilience becomes a reminder of your own potential. Their stories, their silence, their simple presence show you that grief can be carried not by denying it, but by leaning into the support of others. And as you receive their strength, you also begin to offer your own. The healing power of the Sangha lies in its reciprocity. You come into it with sorrow, and it holds you. Over time, you find that your own grief makes you more tender toward others, more capable of holding their sorrow when they need it. What you once carried alone becomes part of a shared fabric of compassion. In this fabric, no thread is separate. The tears of one member strengthen the understanding of another. The resilience of one gives courage to the rest. In this interwoven support, grief is no longer an isolating prison, but a collective journey toward transformation. To surrender grief to the Sangha is to trust that your pain can be carried not only by you, but by the larger body of compassion. It is to rest in the truth that healing is not a solitary achievement, but a shared unfolding. In the embrace of community, loss becomes not only something to endure, but something that connects, softens, and ultimately transforms. This is the gift of the Sangha, a living reminder that in sorrow, as in practice, we walk together. Loss will always touch our lives, but Buddhism shows us it does not have to break us. Through the wisdom of impermanence, we learn to let go gently. Through the emptiness of ownership, we discover freedom from clinging. Through karmic interdependence, we see that every life and every loss ripples meaningfully into the world. The middle way teaches us balance. Silence teaches us to listen deeply. Metta teaches us to transform love into boundlessness. And community teaches us we are never alone. Even in grief, there are gateways to awakening, moments that strip away illusion and reveal what truly matters. As you let these teachings rest in your heart tonight, may you feel lighter, softer, and more at peace. Grief may not vanish, but it no longer needs to define you. You carry forward compassion, clarity, and courage, the seeds of healing planted in every teaching the Buddha left behind. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What teaching in this journey spoke to your heart the most? Share your reflections in the comments. I read every one, and your words may bring comfort to someone else walking their own path through loss. And if you found peace or strength in this video, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you'll be guided through more wisdom like this. Together, we'll keep learning, healing, and walking the path of compassion.